Hey guys, welcome to the Adventure Photo Show live stream. This is something I do every Friday night. Mostly focused on photography, question and answer, and we just see where the evening takes us. I'm Steve Reichert. I'm an adventure photographer, filmmaker, and also currently a nursing student. So every Friday I try to bring something to discuss with you guys and try to have something to talk about. And this week we've been doing a photo challenge on Twitter, and also I've recently opened it up to Instagram as well. And so that's what I want to talk to you guys about a little bit tonight, just to start off with, as well as a couple of questions, some things I've been thinking about with my channel, maybe some ideas for some new directions. And specifically, I've been thinking about making a little bit more Fuji specific content for my channel, which is something that I've toyed with back and forth a little bit, because I feel like a lot of the photography subscribers that I've gotten here, a lot of them are, or at least found this channel through my work with the Fuji system, specifically the X-T2. And you know, my focus is really more on having fun with the camera rather than use this type of camera versus that type of camera. But it's something I've been thinking about, you know, just ways to try to grow the channel and bring more stuff, more people, I guess, not stuff, more people into this community. And frankly, it's just because, you know, like when I release videos, sometimes they do really well, and then sometimes they don't. You know, like this last photo challenge, I made a video yesterday, which this new photo challenge that we are doing actually was just out shooting for this new photo challenge today. It's all about self-portraiture, basically trying to redeem the concept of the selfie from being a vapid, narcissistic waste of time to kind of bringing the self-portrait into a little bit more of its own as an artistic means of expression, and, you know, showing yourself or incorporating yourself into your stories, and, you know, trying to do better than just the selfie. And one of the things I was, you know, talking about a little bit in that video yesterday was, and it kind of bothered me, not because I expect all my videos to appeal to a huge amount of people, but typically even my, you know, normal videos that I just make for you guys that follow my channel. And good evening to everybody who's joined. I see you guys popping up in the chat there. Good to have you all here. You know, normally my lower performing, or my just normal videos, they usually reach a few hundred people. And this one was like kind of struggling even just to make it past the 100 view mark. And I feel like it's kind of interesting, actually, to talk about the whole concept of the selfie and why it is that we hate selfies. And if we should just accept the idea that selfies suck and that we just leave it at that, or whether there is something more to it. And I tend to think that the self-portrait is something that actually has some value. It's something that, you know, we see. I bought a book of Arnold Newman's work, and you know, as a very respected photographer, he has a handful of his own portraits in his book. And that got me to thinking that maybe, you know, the whole problem with the selfie, or the thing that we find so objectionable about it, is not the idea that somebody is trying to put themselves into their own work, but it's just the idea that, you know, a selfie is a very, it's a shortcut in a lot of ways. You know, it's kind of refusing to put effort into the aesthetics, into the composition, and just saying, here, you should want to see me. Yes, Vivian Meyer as well. And I would be interested to hear others, because I feel like there are other artists. I have photo challenge in the title of the video, but I can play around with the title and the tags a little bit too. That might help somewhat. But anyways, yeah, that was really my thought process there. And also too, that I know a lot of people, a lot of us, we struggle to get out from behind the camera sometimes, and it's a lot easier to, you know, kind of hide behind a camera and point it at somebody or something else, and it's a little bit more challenging to kind of stick your own self out there a little bit more. And so yeah, definitely figured it would be kind of difficult. Today was my first day out shooting for that particular photo challenge, and I have to say it was a decent amount of work, not only because I was trying to shoot my own self-portraiture, but also because of the fact that I'm using manual focus lenses still, not necessarily on purpose, but just because that was the lens that I wanted to use. I had just going out to play in the fall foliage, and I have this little Industar 50mm f3.5 lens on the X Pro 1, and since I was still on, I was using that. I said, what the heck, I'm going to keep that on there and just shoot with it. And I brought my X100F along as well, but I didn't really get to a point where I felt inclined to use that. So and yeah, it's definitely hard to take a good self-portrait. Like, I think to a certain extent it's, you have to really relax to the point where you stop thinking about what you're doing. It takes some repetition. At least this is what I found today. The first part is finding decent light, getting kind of the shot set up from a technical standpoint, and then really getting the gesture right is the second part of that. Because really a good portrait or a photo of a person, the gesture is a big part of it, not just the cropping and the framing and the light, although those are certainly really important. But that gesture, the position, that the angle of the head, the face, what you're doing with your hands, all of these other things, like the gesture has to be really natural. And I think the only way that you get that part is through repeating. So for me, what I found, at least today, is that it took 3 to 4 attempts to get the framing and the light kind of the way that I wanted it, and get myself kind of positioned in the frame, the kind of where I wanted, and setting marks, pre-focusing everything to specific marks and saying, okay, this is where I'm going to stand, and then kind of trying that 3 or 4 times, and then after that it was like another 3 or 4 times to get the gesture right, to the point where it didn't look like I was like trying to act normal, act natural type of thing, but where it just kind of came together. So that's what I've been finding so far. I'd be curious to hear a little bit from you guys, if you are experiencing anything, kind of, if this is something that is on your radar, if anybody's even gotten out there and started working on this yet, because I noticed, like, hey, Ryan, good to have you here from LA, very cool. I definitely feel like the manual focus photo challenge was a little bit more straightforward, because everybody was like putting pictures out there using the LV photo challenge hashtag, and like we were starting to see submissions like really quickly. And with this one, I keep checking the tag and there's not really anything out there. And I mean, even in my own stuff, I haven't put anything out there yet, and so it's like everybody's kind of waiting for somebody else to go first. So I get the sense that this is, this is fairly stout, and I know that, there's Sean and I actually were talking on Instagram earlier about kind of the whole selfie thing, and like wanting to, kind of feeling a little bit reticent, because he said his fiance would make fun of him for taking selfies, because he's always giving her a hard time about taking selfies, and like, trying to really use this photo challenge as an opportunity to draw a line between the selfie and the self-portrait, because I think that there really is a big difference between the two, and I think that we have the opportunity to explore some of those. And Queen of San Joaquin, good to have you in here this evening as well. I would love to hear some of your ideas if you're open to sharing them. And King Yuzi says, I'm going full-on studio mode with this challenge. Gonna get some studio lights and really do it to it. That sounds awesome. Looking forward to seeing some of those. Yeah, part of it too, honestly, is just like curiosity, because like I don't really know what most of you guys look like, and I feel like you all get to see more than enough of me on these live streams, and like I don't really have, most of you guys, I just know your like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter profiles or your YouTube comments, which is like the size of a postage stamp, right? And so I probably wouldn't recognize most of you, unfortunately, if I bumped into you on the street. So I think this is kind of another nice way to break the ice a little bit and be like, hey, here's, you know, who we are, here's what we look like. And of course, there's a lot of different ways we can do portraits. I mean, you can still remain fairly difficult to recognize even while putting yourself in your own portrait, right? Like personally, I like environmental portraits. Nothing that I shot today was really very tight, like not stuff that I would say would, you know, be a profile picture or something like that, like a headshot. Everything that I shot today was very much like, you know, environmental portrait type of thing. And I think there's different ways too to kind of, one of the pictures that I shot, and of course I'm gonna, you know, I'm still editing these, and I'm gonna put them out on Twitter, and then I'm gonna make a throwaway account on Instagram for, you know, these shots. Actually, I have it. It's at, I think it's Steven Reichert with a PH, or Steve Reichert. It's one of those. I posted one photo on it. It's like in addition to my Living Vertical Twitter. Car selfies. That sounds cool. I would like. I'm interested to hear where you go with that idea. That sounds really cool. But yeah, I have one of the kind of closer shots that I've done so far, tighter shots, was just focus on my shoes, and without getting, you know, I'm not gonna try to, well, I can't really pick my leg up that high to show you, but these shoes that I'm wearing, I've had these things since 2013, and these things climbed Kilimanjaro by way of my effort while they were on my feet, and these shoes have been like everywhere with me. They're like one pair of shoes I can't throw away, can't get rid of. I don't have the heart to, like, because I kind of developed a bond with them, I guess. And so I just took a picture, you know, of those shoes, and you know, those are like just an example of ways that you can kind of incorporate some element of yourself into your photo that isn't exactly a self-portrait, but it's kind of, you know, it's hinting at that. It's a way to ease into the challenge, I guess you could say. You know, you could even do shadows, like shadow stuff, or like, you know, yourself out of focus, and like there are a lot of different ways I think that you can approach this without it being, you know, like a straight-on headshot. That would be interesting too. Yeah, well, yeah, these are fairly old. They were on their way out when I bought them in 2013, which is why I was able to get them for a discount when I started training for Kilimanjaro. And now, you know, now they just, at one point they were just my, like, you know, throwaway shoes that I didn't care what would happen to them, so I would just wear them to bum around in. But they really stayed together, and they didn't deteriorate as fast as I thought they would, so I decided to kind of keep them and keep working with them. Yeah, well, don't worry about the hair there, Queen of San Joaquin. I can relate. My hair is at like a weird in-between phase where it's not really properly long, but it's not really short either. And especially with the sides, they get really weird like that too, because sides of your hair, at least as a guy, or at least for me, I don't know, without wanting to delve into like gender normative hairstyle tropes, and that whole discussion, but you know, there's a certain point where the hair on the side of your head, and you put the hat on, it starts to flip out a little bit, and then it looks like, oh, okay, you're doing it on purpose. Like, you're actually growing, your hair is intentionally long, not just like you're a mess and you look shabby. And right now I'm kind of at that, like, my hair is a mess and I look shabby phase. Like, I need another couple of weeks before my hair gets to where it starts to look intentional, but in the meantime, I'm just going to suffer through it. And do environmental portraits for this photo challenge rather than doing, you know, like the super tight headshot stuff. Actually, interesting point, the headshot that I have for this channel, the profile pic for this channel, I actually shot with the Panasonic GH5 and the Pentax 200mm f5.6, and just being out here in New York since I've been going to school, and a lot of times when I want to test a lens, and especially at the time when I first got out here, you know, I didn't really have anybody to test lenses on. And typically what I would always do is just like grab my daughter and like be like, hey Lila, let's go for a walk. And then I take a bunch of pictures of her and like use that to test the lens out, see how I like it. But out here, of course, since I'm, just here with my dad, I can use I got to test the lenses on myself. And so that test shot wound up, I was like, oh, I'm actually kind of happy with it. And part of the reason why I think it worked out pretty well is because I wasn't putting a huge amount of pressure on myself. It was just like, oh, I want to see what this lens does. I want to see how it, how it performs, basically, see how happy I can be with this lens and the image quality. And so I wasn't really putting a whole bunch of emphasis on it or too much effort. And I think that helped to make it a little bit easier for me to be at ease with myself. And plays a big role, I think, in how portraits come out. It's just kind of the way that a lot of it is interpersonal skills, and it's funny because when you do this, like, you're really experiencing interpersonal skills with yourself. You're really on both sides of the camera rather than neither. It multiplies. Hello, John. Good to have you here. I don't believe I've seen you here before, but welcome. Yeah, we're just talking about the photo challenge that we're doing this week on Twitter, which is self-portraits. Actually, not just this week, it'll probably be 2 weeks or so, maybe 2.5 weeks, because since this one was a little bit more challenging, I think we might, give a little bit more time for folks to work on it, because I know there was a few people who didn't really even get into last photo challenge that we did using manual focus only because different things, circumstances, life, etc. intervened, as a few people said, and I totally get that. I could have certainly gone on with just doing manual focus shooting for a while myself and felt pretty good about that. In fact, I am still using, as I mentioned earlier, manual focus lenses right now on my X Pro 1 because those have been really good. I've been really happy with those, and because I wound up getting so many vintage lenses kind of at one shot, I didn't really have the chance to work with any individual lens for a extended period of time and really get to know how it performs. So now I'm kind of doing some of that work in reverse. Now that I have kind of my set of vintage lenses, I'm going back through and spending a little bit more time on each lens and working with it. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's what we got going on tonight. And then, of course, the other thing that I've been thinking about a little bit too is, whether or not I want to make this channel a little bit more Fuji specific, since that is predominantly what I am shooting my photography with, my stills. I like the GH5 a lot, but if I'm looking for something to go out and shoot stills with, I'm going to pick up the Fuji like probably 95 times out of 100, just because I just like the way that it feels, and I like I have a feel for it. I have developed a feel. It feels very natural to me when I'm shooting with the Fuji. And, it's not really even a matter strictly of image quality, because I know that I can get good image quality out of the GH5. I don't really have a good explanation for it, honestly. I think what it is I just like the Fuji cameras, and specifically, ironically, the X Pro 1. I just love the way this camera feels in my hands. It's beautiful. It's awesome. It's super simple. It's big enough, but it's small enough in the right ways, and it's not clunky. And with the speed booster and some vintage lenses on this thing is just super, super fun. I love it. And I'm probably, I would, I'm not looking to give up any of my cameras at this point. Like, I sold off the X-T2 and a bunch of my Fuji lenses and all that stuff. I kind of bit that bullet and went through that phase. I'm not looking to give up any gear, but right now, honestly, like, I get more entertainment and more joy out of this X Pro 1 with its, antiquated technology and no Wi-Fi and all that stuff than I do out of the X100F, which is newer, faster, sexier, sharper, all that stuff. And ironic too, because you know my whole reason for getting rid of the XT2 is because I didn't want to have to bother with changing lenses, and you know this is an interchangeable lens camera, so looks like once again I kind of went, you know, full circle, coming back to the starting point that I was at. But I actually don't change lenses very often on the X Pro 1, so in a lot of ways this is kind of like a fixed 50, although it's not quite a 50 because it's got the speed booster on there. So it's probably somewhere closer to a 40, 45 or so, with that 50mm lens plus the speed booster. But I don't really change lenses a whole bunch just because, well, I don't like to. I like to kind of get in a rhythm, get in a feel of shooting with a given focal length before I, you know, start moving things around or start changing. And I like the X100F a lot. I mean, it's a fantastic camera, don't get me wrong. There's something that I've really kind of gotten in the habit of just tinkering with the X Pro 1, and that's been really nice. But it's nice to have it's nice to have some variety, I guess, to kind of have phases, to be able to build that into what you're doing so that you kind of move seasonally and you don't have to get like pigeonholed into one thing. And I think there's some value in that, rather than saying this is always the best or this is always what I want to do, but rather say this is what I feel like doing right now, this is fun, so I'm going to do this until it's not fun anymore. Queen of San Joaquin, great question. How did I set up my self-portrait? I might be able to actually make a video about this in the future, although right now I have a couple more videos that are in the queue that I have to edit before I can do fresh stuff. And yeah, but in short, how I set up my self-portrait, I had a little GorillaPod, and so I mounted the camera pretty low. It was about, you know, 12 inches or so off the ground. And my first shot really was, so the way I approached it was I was looking for good light. I was looking for interesting light, and I was out. There's a state property near my house where basically what happened was the government came in, they bought up a whole bunch of land back in the 60s and 70s. They were going to incorporate it into the local airport, and then basically a variety of environmental groups came in and said, no, there's like spotted tree toads here, you can't you know, incorporate this into the airport. So the land basically went dormant, and all of the buildings and structures kind of fell into disrepair, and there's a few of them that are still left there, including one commercial or industrial space, which is pretty cool. It looks moderately post-apocalyptic, and the roof is all caved in, and it's just like a block, you know, cinder block wall with a bunch of graffiti on the inside of it. So it's a pretty interesting location, and because the roof is caved in, there's interesting light coming in, and so it's kind of dark on the inside, but there's a few windows that are broken out and a few holes in the ceiling that kind of have these beams of sunlight. So basically what I tried to do was just kind of take a few shots just to frame it up and say, okay, here's where the light is, and here's where I'm anticipating, you know, I'm going to try to stand somewhere in the light, and then everything else is going to be relatively, you know, encapsulated in shadows and darkness. So it's going to be a little bit of sort of a low-key type of portraiture. And of course the flexibility, being able to push the raw files out of the Fuji, is a nice thing, you know, that you have. And I wound up doing a variety of different edits, where some of them are a little bit brighter, some of them are a little bit darker and a little bit more moody. But you know, kind of seeing the light first, that was the first thing, and then kind of setting it up and blocking. I know in like stage directions or in acting they call it blocking, where they'll put like little they'll put tape on the stage or wherever. It's like, this is where you need to be when you deliver this line, when you're moving across, moving through the shot, you need to hit that spot. And so what I did is I used like a leaf or a stone or something that I was going to put my foot next to when I was setting up the self-portrait, and then I would also focus on that and get everything so that my focal plane would be right at that mark where I blocked for myself to stand. Then I put on the 10-second timer, hit the button, ran over to the mark, and the first couple were just to try to make sure that I positioned myself physically correctly next to the mark, so that I would be in focus, so that the light would be hitting me the right way at the right angle. And then once I said, okay, this is where I need to have my left foot, for example, and I know that if I have my left foot here, then I'm going to be at the right spot in the frame, then, you know, then the next few shots, then I spent really focusing on just getting the gesture right and kind of turning my head a little more this way, turning my head a little bit that way, trying to pretend like I actually know what to do with my hands when I don't. I'm sitting there like, you know, like that. Yeah, and it can be a little bit challenging to do with the manual lens, that's true, but pre-focusing actually works really well. And hey, good to see you, Samuel. Yes, it also works very well for video, video too, and I think that might be funny that you mentioned that, because I felt strangely comfortable using manual focus to shoot myself in this way, and I think part of that is because I have been using manual focus so much on video that doing it now for photo stuff doesn't seem that intimidating. So a couple of things I did to make it a little bit easier for the still photography was I stopped it down a little bit. So instead of shooting wide open and giving myself the greatest, you know, or the thinnest, narrowest depth of field, I stopped it down a little bit so that I was which also actually kind of enhanced the contrast between, you know, the bright light coming through the holes in the roof and the window, and also the background. But that also, you know, kind of gave me the opportunity to have a little bit more flexibility there, not worry if I, you know, moved an inch or two one way or the other that I would go, you know, have just such a thin depth of field. And honestly, that's one of the things that I think is at least one of the reasons why I personally am not a huge, you know, disciple of the all bokeh all the time, you know, way of the sect of the religious sect of photography where everything is about the bokeh. Because from a practical standpoint, I think that most of the photography that I find the most interesting that I like to do, it's very much tied to the environment in which the person finds themselves. And if everything is too blurred out, then you really defeat the purpose, and you may as well just be sitting, you know, in your bedroom in front of just a collage of crappy wallpaper, right? And granted, you know, I have some nice photos here, right? Like my family and stuff like that. They're not crappy. And like my photos here that you can see, like I don't think these are crappy. Like these are nice photos. But still, right? Like all that stuff notwithstanding, you know, the bokeh can work really, really good in some situations, but there's also a point of diminishing return. So anyways, that was really key to my being able to set up the self-portrait was, you know, not having a super shallow depth of field and doing a few test shots in between and then blocking everything and pre-focusing on the blocks where I was going to stand. And then once I kind of did, and that took me maybe like 4 or 5 shots back and forth, you know, and it was pretty easy to kind of get that stuff dialed in because I wasn't up and down to the camera. So, you know, that was, you know, the camera was down on the ground. I wasn't have to go up and down to readjust the focus for the most part because I got the focus where I wanted it the first time. I just had to make sure that I was moving in, you know, that I was positioning myself correctly, and then it took a few more shots to get the gesture right and to get the light the way that I wanted it to, because I wanted to try a few different things, and I wanted to see like if I would turn one way and if I could get the light to come through my glasses and like, you know, make like a neat little flare in my glasses, or if I wanted to have it where I was stepping through the light or whether I was stepping into the light, a few of those different things. So I worked through the whole thing. I took maybe like 12 shots total, with the first like 3 or 4 being just kind of blocking and testing for the shot. So I think that definitely, you know, trial and error is going to be part of that. But if you have a little bit more of a deliberate vision in mind for what you want to get, then it makes it a little bit less it makes it a little bit less intimidating, or you don't feel as bad putting the time in to get the shot that you want, because you have a handful of ideas. And again, it all goes back to making you more deliberate in your photography. Because for me, when I shoot other people, more often than not, I approach it from a standpoint of like, oh, we're out here doing this thing. I'm going to look for something interesting to happen, and I'm going to try to, grab a candid shot, like street photography style, in the least intrusive way that I possibly can. But when it's myself, I feel a little bit more comfortable to say, okay, like, what do I want to do? How can I set this up? And I can be patient with myself, because I don't feel like I'm wasting my time. Like, this is fun for me, so I can go to a place where it's a little bit more interesting light and the background is a little bit more interesting, and I can take some time to set it up and work that through and really have a vision for what it is that I want to capture. And there's actually a couple more things that I'm going to try to do for this photo challenge. Maybe not even for this photo challenge, but maybe for some other photo challenges to do that, where I would like to do the steel wool. I don't know if you guys have seen that. There have been a couple of videos. You've probably seen a bunch of it on Instagram, where you light the steel wool on fire, then you do a long exposure, and the steel wool like throws off sparks, and as it's flying around all over the place, like, it makes some interesting light trails. It's kind of a fad on Instagram right now, or at least it was over the summer. I know Peter McKinnon did a video about it, and I thought that was kind of interesting. There's a place up the road from me. Hey, Low Spec Gamer 101, good to have you here. There's a place up the road from me that makes modern art, I guess you could say, like these big, huge sculptures out of metal, and it's kind of in like sort of an industrial, like an industrial warehouse. It used to be a cement factory, and now they make modern art out of it, and they put these huge pieces that go to local outdoor art galleries. Just like massive pieces that are like 2 stories high. Really beautiful stuff. So I want to see about talking to them. The only thing is, like, I want to actually do like a full-on shoot there, maybe do like a vlog about it too, because their stuff is really cool. And so I'm interested in kind of showing you guys that, and I felt like that might be an interesting place to do some, like, either do night photography with some longer exposure stuff, or maybe, incorporate the steel wool there, although of course I don't know how receptive they're going to be to some, idiot photographer coming in with like a bunch of, incendiary devices, swinging stuff around in the middle of the night. Not sure exactly what their insurance rider will or will not cover. Perhaps it's one of those, like, better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. Could be one of those types of things, but we'll have to see where that goes. Let's see, got a couple questions here. JR says, I've been practicing with focus stacking. I got it nailed down. Can't wait to shoot some more landscapes. Focus stacking. Very cool. I have not done much at all with focus stacking. JR, what camera are you using with that? I know the GH5 does focus stacking, but I'm going to have to play with that myself, because that's one of the, like, focus stacking and the video photo mode. Those are 2 things that I have not done anything with. At this point, because I've been kind of, I know the things that I typically use the camera for. Okay, the 5D Mark IV focus stacking in Photoshop. Okay, all right. So you're shooting, the stack manually, and then you're combining the images in Photoshop. Is that what you're saying? So you're not stacking within the camera. That's my understanding of what you're saying, which could be really interesting too. I haven't tried much of that. Queen of San Joaquin says, I'm going to try some realistic gritty shots because I live in the country. That's awesome. Gritty is cool. I'm a big fan of gritty personally. That's me talking. Because I live in the country and I've got some old junky trailers that don't look great, but I'm going to try to make it aesthetically pleasing. Very neat. Yeah, I think that when you photograph things that are real for you, or that are authentic for you, or that are in your area, it's nice because you get to make those things your own. And for me, like the kind of washed out industrial building that I was photographing in today, that's some place that I've been going for like 18 years at least, since I was in high school. I used to ride my bike back through there because it's just down the road. My dad's family actually lived in that parcel of land before the government bought it all out. So it was like, you know, it was kind of interesting having the opportunity to approach something like that and enjoy some of the detail and some of the interesting stuff, because you can find pretty anywhere. You know, pretty isn't necessarily interesting. Yeah. Samuel Mingo says, the ugly things are the most interesting subjects, like a face with lots of freckles. Now, to be clear, I don't think that's what you mean, Samuel, but it's just like when you have details or things that are out of the ordinary, you know, those things add more texture, more body, more life to what it is that you're doing. And I think that's why, one of the reasons why I've always been drawn to environmental portraiture rather than, you know, prettier portraits and stuff like that. You know, I mean, like, granted, you know, when I'm taking a picture of my daughter, you know, I'm not going to try to, you know, up the clarity filter to like 100 and like bring out every blemish, you know. I'm going to give her a little bit of a break, or like, you know, different people that I'm photographing, you know what I mean? But the pictures that really get me excited is when I get, like, you know, an old person with like a craggly face, and I can really, like, you know, bring out all the details of the wrinkles and the blemishes and you know, the weathering on their face that most people wouldn't look at that. And, you know, it's not necessarily what you're going to see in high fashion, let's put it that way. But I'm totally fine with that. So anyways, Queen of San Joaquin, I'm very interested to see what you do with that, and I would, yeah, go nuts. I think that could be really cool. I only wish that I had more of that kind of stuff around me to shoot, but I'm fairly limited. Although I'm going to try going, there's an old stone church not too far from me. I was driving through town the other day and, you know, lamenting how much I hate where I live. I mean, I don't hate where I live right now, but it's like I feel very isolated because I'm used to being in the outdoors. I'm used to being like in Utah in the mountains climbing, where it's like, hey, let's go do a canyon, hey, let's go on a hike, like let's go climb a mountain, like living right a stone throw away from a beautiful national park. And now I'm living in kind of, you know, suburban upstate New York, and it's like, but anyways, I was lamenting that while I was driving through town recently, and I drove past this old church, and it was kind of in the evening, and the light hit it just right, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. It looks moderately like creepy. Like I could maybe stage a portrait or of some sort there at night, and kind of maybe, you know, do some interesting stuff with that. So I think a lot of it is just being being creative and just looking for those opportunities wherever we can find them. You know, and that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this challenge, or these challenges in the first place, is because I want to have, want to have ways to push my work a little bit, and to force myself to see stuff that is otherwise that I would miss because I'm too focused on looking for, you know, natural beauty. Well, maybe look for man-made beauty, because it's out there, you know, it's a thing. I think King Yuzi, that was you that said that there is a photographer who swings LEDs on a string. Yeah, light trail spheres. That's pretty interesting. I have not seen that. I've only seen, and to be fair, I've only seen a little bit of it, and the little bit that I've seen has been with the steel wool. And basically what you do, and again, this is not the OSHA approved, you know, insurance covered version of this, but you take like a whisk or an egg beater, you know, some sort of a wire cage, and you put steel wool in it, and then you put, you know, a snap link or a string or what have you onto the, you know, so it makes like basically a cage, a small cage that's holding the steel wool, but obviously, you know, a cage where sparks will be able to get out. Then you light the steel wool, and you, you know, swing it around a little bit, and the sparks fly off, and it's pretty cool. Eric Pear Photo on Instagram. Thank you, Ryan. I would love to check that out, actually. Of course, I'm streaming on my phone right now, so I can't do that, but I will have a look at that afterwards. Yeah, so the steel wool, though, there's a couple of guys that did videos on it. I watched a little bit of the Peter McKinnon video on it, and it looked pretty cool. And I've always been kind of a sucker for long exposure photography, specifically night photography. I really like, always have. So I figure that could be a good way to, you know, if I can enlist some help locally here, maybe get a friend to go out with me, and then that way, you know, yeah, it's always more fun too if you have another person help. Maybe if I can even find, like, you know, a moonlit night. Oh, don't worry about a fire extinguisher, Jason. It's all concrete in there. Actually, I can show. I can kind of show you what this building looks like, because I have some. I'm just scrolling back through the myriad of pictures that I took today. And I know that this is not nearly as, you know, high tech as being able to. So here's the building that I was in. Let's see, trying to get this. If I could get that to focus on the camera, that'd be great. I don't know if you can actually see that. I need in-body image stabilization for my arm. Anyways, that's the building where I was shooting. So there's almost nothing flammable in there. Although there are some leaves in there, so that's a good point. Maybe I should bring some stuff along. Yeah, that would be a red letter day, no pun intended, if I did that. Star trails, yeah, star trails are awesome. And the big thing, I think, probably the same issue that you'd run into in the UK there, King Yuzu, would probably be that at least here the light pollution is really rough. It's hard, not impossible, but you have to go a decent ways away to get, you know, to escape the amount of excess light from cities and towns. Like, if you drive like an hour or two north of here, which, not a bad idea, maybe something that I will do this fall or winter. Actually, a buddy of mine, Rob, hopefully, who may even be watching, which would be cool if he's on here, Rob from Zion Jeeps, one of my climbing partners from back in the day, and a fellow I used to guide with, and we've been on a lot of great adventures together, and hopefully we'll be on more in the future. But he's going to come up he's in DC right now, and so he's going to come up and visit me hopefully in December, and we're going to do some ice climbing. Yeah, we're going to do some ice climbing up in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, which is like way upstate New York, like by where they had fairly close to the Olympics, where they had the Olympics back in, like, was it 84, Lake Placid. It's in that region, way up in the Adirondack. So hopefully that might be an opportunity to get maybe even get some northern lights. That would be cool. I'd be pretty stoked on that. King Yuzi, yeah, the reddish glow you're talking about that you see in the sky, that is light pollution from, usually from cities, I believe, fairly distant. Like, you can see that in California. I have some photographs that I took in Joshua Tree in the desert. Hey, good evening, Daniel Crotty. Good to see you here. Yeah, like in Joshua Tree, you know, as beautiful and remote as that desert is, you can still see just a pretty substantial amount of light pollution from LA, or in the White Mountains of California, you know, shooting out towards Vegas. You know, and if you can get higher up, that helps. You know, altitude, that could be good. You know, yeah, winter is best, less pollution for sure, better air quality. I would say, you know, I'm sure that, you know, there are decent opportunities for star trails and for night photography, and to eliminate light pollution if you get outside of the cities a little ways, maybe get up into Scotland. I don't know how far that is from you, if that's something that you could just do. Yeah, Queen of San Joaquin, your sunsets are beautiful, but it is smog. I hear that. It's funny, like, we have pretty sunsets out here on the East Coast. You just can't see anything because it's all like a bunch of houses and cars and power lines. And it's like, this would be really nice if, somebody could just like knock down all the houses for about 10 miles. Then that would be, I mean, obviously not, that wouldn't be great, because then where would everybody live, right? But and that wouldn't make for good photos either. But being out west where the sky is much bigger, in Utah particularly, Wyoming, Idaho in some places even, Nevada, I mean, you just have like these raging sunsets where, it fills up the whole sky. And, the funny thing is that you get used to it. Hey, Dave Nevins, good to see you here. Hello to you too. You get a little bit spoiled, you get used to seeing sunsets like that, and, you're like, no big deal. Like, I don't really need to bother with that. You just like pull out your iPhone and just snap a very offhanded picture, and then you come back here and you're like, oh man, I missed that, So I've been going through a bunch of that, and probably, with the trajectory of my schooling for the next few years, it doesn't look like, well, I shouldn't say that. I might be able to get away and do a little bit of traveling here and there, but right now it's a struggle to get time to do any of that stuff, so it's really forcing me to, work on the things right where I am. But it's good to know that, I'm in a similar boat to a lot of you guys and gals. That makes me feel a little bit better, because I feel like for a while being out there in the desert and just kind of roaming, I was able to kind of do what I want and shoot what I want, and I got to the point where the things I would complain about out there were things that everybody else were just like, that's ridiculous. Like, how are you going to complain about that? And everybody else knew that I was spoiled, but I was just like, oh, well, I don't want to have to deal with walking through the sand or going up to Angel's Landing to get that shot. And now I'm like, oh man, I wish I could be close to Angel's Landing. I'd go up there every day. But yeah, Nurse Betty, that's me. Hopefully it will be me. I hope that will be me at some point, because if I can get my nursing on, for what it's worth, since I don't have my own refrigerator, actually I do have, I could hang my graded papers on my dad's refrigerator or on the wall behind me, but I have been crushing it in my classes, which I have to say, one of the things I try to impart to all of my fellow students who are predominantly much younger than me is to just study really hard, because it doesn't suck nearly as much doing it once as it does having to do it twice. So that's my little bit of academic inspiration for everybody out there. King Uzi, I'm with you about the sand. I really, really hate sand. I really hate sand. Water, I'm not crazy about either. Frankly, I don't like any type of discomfort, which is the reason why I need to be someplace where I'm exposed to discomfort, because otherwise I turn into like a complete softie, and I just don't want to leave my room and everything, Daniel, yes, you are correct about that too. Always sit in the front row, won't miss anything the instructor says, and they don't usually pick on you as much. Yeah, it's funny. I really like, it's a very different attitude that I have at this point, where I'm paying for my grades, and so like part of the thing too, and this is weird to say, although I think most of you guys on here are probably over 25, and so the whole frontal lobe development thing has taken place for most of us at this point. And for anybody who's under 25 who might be watching this at any point, this is science. This isn't like my opinion, but like once you get to that point where you have greater perception in terms of how you see your actions in the present impacting your life in the future, it really, really makes a huge, huge difference in the way that you do stuff. Because like for me, I'm looking at these classes like, okay, I have to suck it up and do this right now, but like I have a life that I want to get back to, and the sooner I get these classes done with good grade is going to enable me to get back to actually living my life instead of being here. When I went to school the first time, it was just like, oh, this is my life. Like, this is all I have literally ever known, was sitting in classes and trying to get grades because somebody says that at some point that I need to do really well on that, but I really had zero idea of what that looked like, and but the one thing, King Yuzi, you say so many regrets, and I think a lot of us have regrets, but I think the one thing, and I think about this a lot, because today while I was out walking, listening to podcasts, and, like I have a journal, a little moleskin book where I write notes to my daughter. I write her, usually once a week or once every 2 weeks. I don't do it as often as I should, but like instead of journaling to myself, I actually try to tell her about like this is what happened in your life, and so that she'll, for both of us, frankly, because I even look at videos and pictures of her from like a year ago, and I'm like, I've forgotten so much. It's incredible how much you forget with that stuff. So I do it for my own benefit as well. And she'll probably be my age before she actually is like, oh, that's cool, and I'll probably be dead by that point. But hopefully, hopefully not. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe she'll be into it sooner. But anyways, the one thing that, no, I don't have a gimbal. I would love one, though, if anybody has a gimbal that they would like me to test out. I've thought about getting a cheap gimbal for my iPhone just to have a gimbal, but I don't have one at this point. But thinking about the things that I write to my daughter, I was trying to think more in the direction, instead of just saying, all right, I'm going to tell you what happened, I want to actually give you words of advice. I want to leave things in there for the future. And the two things that really came to me today that I have to write about a little bit, but I haven't done it yet, is just, number one, the truth always matters. Like, there's truth and there's untruth. And number one, truth matters. And number two, you always have a choice. And I think those are the two things that I look at in my life, and I see so much of the wasted time and the things that I see is from other people around me that I know as being tragic, as being just these, not even wastes of time, but wastes of life. People I know who've taken their own lives, who've given up on life, who are still physically alive, but just going through the motions. The saddest thing to me is when people don't recognize that they have choices. It's like they want to have one specific choice, and because they don't have that specific choice, they negate and neglect all of the other choices that they do have. And it leads to this like victim mentality, and it just drives me insane when I see people. And I see so many people who are my age who feel that way, and I just want to grab them and shake them and be like, wake up, like, care about something, do something that means something to you, believe in something, work on something, care about something, and remember that you always have a choice. It's like, you can't control everything, but there's always something that you can control. And if you can always focus on the things that you can control, it's always going to move you forward in one form or another. And, that's just something, I don't know. That's my little philosophical tidbit for the moment. Because something that I focus on. Living with my dad, my dad is 70 something, and I love my dad, and living with parents is tough because like they get to a certain age and they become like kids, and I see my dad at a point where he's given up on trying to do, like, put effort into things. It's like anything that requires more than a little bit of effort, like, he just won't do it. But he won't say, oh, I don't want to do this thing. He'll make up like a reason or make up some big long excuse, like a story, to tell himself about why I can't do this thing, instead of just doing this simple thing that would be really easy to do. Like, you could clean up the stuff that you don't need, throw it away, and then you use these things and you keep them in order. Just as a for instance, or like even just like, and it happens, and I don't want to like vent too much of that stuff to you guys, because I don't know that everybody really wants to hear about my frustrations with my dad, but I think that many people can identify, and it's sad because like I look at kind of where he is in his life, and I'm thinking to myself, how can I not be in that situation? How can I do the opposite of that? Because I don't want to reach a point, no matter where I am in my life, I don't want to reach a point where I stop pushing, where I accept whatever is going on, or accept what my life is. Just be like, okay, this is good. I'm just gonna sit here and like, watch TV and like eat junk food until I croak. Like, I just really don't want to ever. I don't want to look at things like that, and seeing somebody that once upon a time did not look at things like that, but who now fully lives their life according to that principle, that it's just like, oh well, like there's nothing I can do. It's really, really frightening, and it's hard because, like, on one hand, it inspires me to do more, but on another hand, it's also like you're kind of always having that suppressive negative influence, and it's it's a lot. Yeah. It is a lot like addiction. Rationalizing and convincing, King Yuzi, that's right on the money. And I think that without knowing a lot from a neuroscience perspective, I think that there probably is a lot of mental circuitry that is shared in common between those processes of like addiction and like senile dementia. And like my dad isn't senile, it's not dementia, but it's like you look at it, and I don't know any other way of saying it other than it's just there's cracks forming, and it's like it scares, it's sobering, it's scary, it's frustrating. And frankly, even, I look at other people that I'm friends with that are my age, and I see the same sort of mentality kind of taking root, where, well, it absolutely is a coping mechanism. It absolutely is a coping mechanism, so they don't have to face reality. But I see so many people my age who are doing this too, and I'm like, it's like, you could be, it's one thing to see somebody who's older get to that point, because it is sad, but it's like, okay, they've, lived up to their, they've lived the majority of their life without kind of giving up, and now they're kind of tired, they're at the end of their kind of, their life, and they want to just relax and, let their hair down a little bit. I'm like, okay, like, it bothers me, but okay, fair enough. Like, you've had a few good decades of like getting after it, fine. But like, I see people like even my own age that are just like, oh well, this is how it is, and this is all I'm ever going to be, and this is all I can do, and blah blah blah. And it's like, dude, I watch you make choices. Like, I watch you make choices over and over and over that lead you in this direction, and we talk about it, and I say, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Oh yeah, I guess I didn't have to. I could have blah blah blah. And then it's just like every time, it's like, well, one of these days I'll find myself. I'm like, dude, you don't find yourself. It doesn't work that way. Like, you gotta, you make decisions and you make choices according to your priorities, and those dictate where you get to, so yeah. Yeah, very true. People do get stuck in the mindset and they can't get out. And I think to a certain extent, a lot of times people at our age, or at younger ages, I guess, because I don't know how old everybody is here, but, a lot of times I feel like people accept a mindset that they probably wouldn't accept if they knew that they would be stuck in that mindset for the rest of their life. It's like, okay, this is kind of a lousy way to look at my life, but I'm going to just do this for the next few years, and then eventually I'm going to change. Something good is going to happen. I'm going to, kind of flip the script and kind of go into a new chapter in my life. And then they find out that it's kind of like that thing that your parents maybe or your siblings used to tell you, right? Like, if you make that face again, it's going to freeze that. One of these times it's going to freeze that way, and you're going to walk around looking like a dingus. It's kind of that way, I think, with people's mindset or their attitude, where they expect it to be something that is only going to be short-lived, it's only going to be temporary, but eventually, you just kind of stick that way, and then before you know it, that's who you are. That's what your life is turned into. And that's scary, and it's dangerous, because it's like, that can happen, that doesn't happen someday, that happens right here, right now, and yeah, Jason, you're right. The issue, unfortunately, is usually that your lucky number doesn't come up. And like, a lot of times, I was looking at that myself with what I was doing here with Living Vertical. And there's a certain extent to which I'm still like looking at that, because you know, could I have as much fun doing this stuff if I wasn't putting out YouTube videos, you know, twice a week or even once a week? And, you know, maybe could I have as much fun if I just took pictures, posted stuff on my Instagram, and, you know, got rid of the Patreon, got rid of my, you know, stopped trying basically, and just like did a live stream every Friday night and just hung out with you guys and like totally didn't care, you know? And maybe that's what it'll be in the future. I don't know. But there's definitely that, you know, there's definitely that tendency to want to wait for your lucky number to come up. But that's why I went back to school. And, you know, there's part of me that thinks like, oh, that was kind of dumb. And even now I look at it and I'm like, man, if only I didn't, you know, as much as I'm getting done now, while I'm in school, I'm doing almost as much for this channel as I was before I was in school. So I'm teaching 3 classes, I'm taking 3 classes, and I'm running a YouTube channel, and like the stuff that I'm taking is really hard for me. I mean, like the chemistry, bio, and physics, not physics, psychology, started with a P. And it's confusing to me. So, you know, I'm taking like, and it's like just a whole bunch of, you know, stuff, and I'm like, man, maybe I should just like quit school and now go back, because I learned what I needed to learn from being in school for 3 months, which was that I can actually do a lot more than I was doing, and I need to manage my time better. And so then I can quit school and I'll just go back and really make it as a YouTube star. And then I'm like, no, that is not a good way to think about it at all. Because I really want to make sure that I'm not relying on luck for what I'm doing. I want to take the opportunities to be intentional and to be deliberate about as much as I can, and let the luck happen. You know, if the luck happens, if some, you know, my channel keeps growing, like who knows what's going to happen. Like I can't figure out how people go in 1 year to like 1 million subs. I don't know how that happens. I just can't conceptualize it, and to a certain extent I don't even want to conceptualize it, but who knows, you know. It could work out. It could happen in the future. I'm keeping the option open, but I'm not going to rely on it, you know. Queen of San Joaquin says, I'm 33. I find myself getting stuck in a comfort zone, and I go, uh-oh, better do something else and get out of this. Very, very good way to look at it. I know I definitely do that a lot too. Just try to keep things changing, and, you know, call yourself out on stuff, and don't be, you know, it's like you have to kind of be your own worst critic, and kind of be accountable. And yeah, things do get different, Queen. I totally hear you. When you hit 30, things get different. I'm 35, and I don't know whether it's having a kid or whether it's just like age and like, you know, body chemistry, and like, you know, all the processes start slowing down, and it's just like, I don't know what it is, but yeah, it's hard, and this is good motivation. I don't know, any of you guys listen to podcasts, the Jocko podcast, one of the former Navy SEAL, and very, very inspiring, and very intelligent, just brilliant guy, and his whole thing is like, you know, there's no better time than now, and there's no better place than right here. So if there's a thing that you want to do, just start doing it. And it really is as simple as that. And because discipline creates more discipline, and lack of discipline creates more lack of discipline. So it's like whatever you put effort into, whatever you invest into, that's what you're going to get more out of. And so you really can't afford to slow down. And I think that's what it is that it's easier before you're 30. I think it's easier to kind of go back and forth and just be like, oh, I'm going to be lazy for a few weeks, then I'm going to go be really busy, and then I'm going to be lazy. And then like once you hit 30, you just kind of like hit this patch where whatever it is that you're doing, you just go for it and you keep doing it. And it's like the inertia acts differently upon you, so that if you slow down, it's a lot harder to kind of ramp your energy back up and energy, like mental energy too, like focus and positivity, not just like physical energy, but like to kind of ramp back into whatever it is that you're doing. It gets harder to do that. And I don't know whether that's purely physiologically, whether it's psychologically, but maybe a little bit of both. Jason R. said, I've heard it said that the most successful people are open to all opportunities. Something that I had to learn is just to stop saying no or I can't. That is really good. A good principle there. You know, I think a lot of the stuff that we say and our words, they tend to be very impactful on that stuff. You know, we disempower ourselves with a lot of our vocabulary and the way that we talk about ourselves and our work and what we're doing and what we want to do. And there's, I don't know if you guys have heard of Jordan Peterson. He's apparently at this point, he's fairly central polarizing figure in the whole, you know, political correctness versus freedom of speech thing. He's actually a Canadian professor in Toronto. One of the most brilliant people that I have ever heard speak, I would say, as a philosophy major and a student of philosophy and just ideas. I find most of what he says to be very interesting. I would highly recommend looking at some of his stuff. He makes some really good points about just kind of the way that you talk to yourself and just like stop doing that. Like stop cutting yourself off at the knees by talking about what you can't do and how you can't do it, because then, you know, this happens to me a lot of times where I'll be online on my phone and like the technology just like sucks so much of our time, because like you get depressed about something or you're going through Instagram and you're looking at, and I use Instagram as just kind of like a blanket example. It could be Instagram, could be YouTube, maybe it's not even social media specifically, or it may not be something that's this straight across, but like, you know, you see somebody's picture, they're doing this awesome thing, they're working on this awesome project and everybody's stoked for them, and you're just like, all you see is that beautiful shot and everybody like loving it and like, you know, brands contacting them and all this success happening, and then you're like, man, what am I doing wrong? I used to kind of be in that position. Now I'm here. Now I'm not doing that. What's wrong with me? What do I need to do? Where do I need to go? Then you start thinking maybe I need to redesign my logo. So you go in, you start like messing around with your logo and start retyping your caption and your like your profile on your different social media accounts because you need to tighten things up. And then you realize that your channel trailer isn't great on YouTube, and it's like you get like sucked down this black hole of like, you know, focusing on things that don't really matter, that don't bake a lot of bread, and you know, a lot of time gets wasted. And that was me like last night for a long time. It happens to me all the time. I get really like discouraged and just kind of, you know, all part and parcel of, you know, like some weekends like this weekend I can't go to Massachusetts to see my family. And that's part of it, you know, that sucks. Like, I miss my daughter, and just being able to run around out in the woods with her, and there's some stuff I want to teach her, and, you know, but at the same time, like, I know that I'm staying home this weekend because I need to get work done so that I can have more freedom next weekend maybe to go, type of thing. And so that's kind of the thing, is like, you know, you have to, yeah, there's no easy way around it. It's hard and it sucks and it's unpleasant. And I think that the key is to love that unpleasantness and to know that that's an investment. Let's see. JR said there are only 4,000 YouTube channels with over 1 million subs and about 1 billion YouTubers. That is very true. I agree about not putting all one's eggs in one basket. However, there's also a lot of, yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right. And I mean, I don't ever want to be, like, my goal has never been, and I said the thing about being a YouTube star in jest. I never have wanted to be a YouTube star. I mean, honestly, like, if I could be anybody on YouTube, I would be, and this is like the worst, like, you know, a little bit of comparison games, but like, if I could be anybody on YouTube, the guys that I would like to be most like, somewhere between the angry photographer, because, I mean, he just gives zero, he does not, like, he's very unencumbered by like best practices in, you know, content creation, and I love that. I think that that's awesome, and so there's a certain extent to which I try to be very like, I don't try to be that way, but that's how I feel, and so I try to reflect that value in my work, where it's just very straightforward and unassuming, and you know, I try as hard as I can within reason, you know, to make things look nice, but beyond a certain point, it's like, yeah, you know what, nobody is, you know, I can't convince anybody that I'm really in a studio overlooking the Manhattan skyline, so it's like, hey, why pretend? You know what, I'm in my bedroom, here's my bed, this is my wall, there's my door, and here's me. And the other guy that I really like on YouTube that I admire a great deal is Matt Day. And his stuff is just very, very personal. It's very personal, and I like that. And it's not like, you know, Casey Neistat vloggy type stuff. It's photography based. You know, it's, you know, I like that a lot. And he has like 50 or 60,000 subs, I think. Ken, Angry Photographer Guy, he's got like around 100. And I don't have any, like, I don't, you know, my goal, it's not like my goal is to get X amount of subs, but what I would like is to be able to have a channel that is large enough to where I can make it work for the people who are subscribed rather than making it work for the people who aren't subscribed. Because there's a certain extent to which, you know, you build your channel and some of your content has to be focused on bringing new people in, and some of it has to be focused on keeping existing people there. And I would much rather just make content for people who are on my channel than try to, you know, make new content to bring more people in. And so that's something that I struggle with a lot, because if I'm going to just do what I want, well, then I'm just going to do what I want, but at the same time, then I'm doing a lot of work for no, you know, for less reward and for less impact, really, is what it comes down to, because it's not, you know, I'm not getting rich doing this. I do this as an exercise for my own, you know, an exercise in credibility, and for my own, you know, because I learn by teaching stuff and having other people, you know, iron sharpens iron. That stuff is really, really important. But, you know, would love to have more people on the channel, but at the same time, it's like, you know, I look at guys like Peter McKinnon. I always talk about Peter McKinnon because he kind of came out of nowhere. Like, he went from being fairly small to, like, over 1 million subs in a fairly short period of time. And it's not like he focused in on a very small niche. He didn't go in there and say, okay, I'm going to be just talking about Fuji cameras, and then he captured everybody who was into Fuji cameras. Like, he just did a lot of, like, everything. And, you know, it's just very curious to me how that happens. And, of course, I'm not getting super sidetracked. I mean, I think this is interesting to discuss. I'm not really sidetracked on it, and I'm not like studying his work and saying, how can I make my videos more like Peter McKinnon? And, like, you know, I think a lot of it, one of the things that I've realized is just in my bio class, my professor, he's very, like, animated, and he's like George Costanza, you know, like, George likes his chicken spicy, you know, like that kind of stuff. Like, he's Seinfeld. Anybody here? No Seinfeld. You know, George Costanza stuff. That's the way the guy, he talks, and I find that super interesting, you know. So I love Seinfeld too. Seinfeld, new season of Curb, by the way, if anybody hasn't watched that yet, it's shaping up to be pretty hilarious. But he really speaks with a lot of passion, and I think that's something that I need to work on and that I can do better. Not trying, and I think this may have something to do with why people really connect with guys like Casey Neistat and Peter McKinnon, is because they do speak very passionately, whereas for me, I am very introspective, so I'm always thinking about what I'm saying, what I'm going to say next, phrasing it exactly right, and trying to craft the sentence structure more than deliver an energy and passion to people on the other side, you know. Well, same, and that's the thing, like, JR, I totally get what you're saying, because I don't like the fake enthusiasm either, but I think there's a point to where it's like you kind of have to fake it, because, like, whatever you do is going to come through maybe 20% less on the other side. So you have to go way over the top to really get through, you know, a fraction of that to other people. For example, like I did this one back in the day when I was, you know, when I had that one successful photography. See, there we go. I'm doing it to myself. I'm diminishing my work. When I did Project 365 in 2012, and I had a really amazing relationship with a sponsor who picked me up and kind of hooked me into doing a bunch of television interviews, and they got like a PR firm from Manhattan involved, and they set me up with this whole thing where basically I would do back-to-back interviews from 4 in the morning to 9 in the morning. It was 5 hours, and like of just going through this, basically the same type of thing. It was like all morning talk shows, and they set up the segment at like this rock climbing gym in Atlanta, and they got, you know, the crew there, and basically they just had me go through these like over and over, just back to back, and it was so hard. And like my handler was standing behind the camera with like these huge cards, like saying smile, and like she was doing all this stuff, like waving and going nuts behind the camera to try to get me, because like you kind of get into this thing and you just kind of talk to people like you're having a normal conversation, but that's not enough. Like you have to like really be passionate. And I mean, I know, but so I totally hear what you're saying about the fake enthusiasm. That gets to be a little much because most people can see through that. And also, like you say, it does get tiring. It becomes monotone. And then people are just kind of like, they don't want to hear it, you know? But I think there is some value to inflection and demonstrating your passion and being able to kind of go up and down to kind of allow people to drift in and out, you know, so. King Uzi says, if you go to older videos, they are completely different from how they are now. Some of it is fake enthusiasm, but there's genuine excitement from doing what they love and making lots of money. Yeah, I'm sure of that. I can believe that. I mean, I'm very curious to see what's going to happen, you know, with me, and, you know, once I get, you know, a couple years and I have my nursing certification and I have the ability to just, you know, have a job. And I don't know. I don't know if I could ever really leave off making videos, because I just like making videos. It's like, I feel like the goal is, it's like, look, I just need to get to the next 1,000 subscribers, and then I'll be like, okay, I did what I came here to do. And then of course, you know, I get there and I'm like, okay, yeah, well, yeah, just the next 1,000 and I'm good. You know, it's like a game in a ways. And the other thing that I like about it is that it does keep me accountable. It very much is a hobby. You know, and it's a hobby that forces me to be accountable with what I'm doing, and I don't know. We'll have to see. You know, there may come a point where I abandon the the video side of things more in favor of just photography. Queen, yeah, somebody told you came off really awkward in your videos. You know, it takes some time to get good at that, you know. I think just practicing a whole bunch, and one thing that helps me, and again, this is something that takes some time. Takes some time to shoot this way, and it takes some time to edit this way, but one of the things that I have found is that if you go on for a longer period of time and you do several takes without like stopping and starting over, but you just keep going, that can help you be a lot less awkward and feel a lot more comfortable, because you kind of break into a rhythm. Whereas if you're just trying to sit down in front of a camera, bang something out, it can be a lot harder. And frankly, it's a skill that you acquire. You know, it's a skill that you acquire, learning how to talk to a camera. Because, like, honestly, when you're talking to the camera, you're not really talking to the camera. Like, when I'm talking to the camera, I'm talking to King Uzi, and I'm talking to Peter and Tiff and Queen and Samuel, and, like, you guys that are my friends that I you know, connected with on this channel. Like, you are the people, and everybody else is, I can't name everybody else necessarily that's on the chat right now, okay? But like, you know, you guys that are constantly interacting with me, that's who I'm thinking that's what I'm thinking of when I'm making my videos. And so I try to think about it like I'm having a conversation with them. You know, that's the way I tend to approach it. Sean Halgren says, I also enjoy the tech reviewers like Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, John at Technobuff, and Michael Fisher. They're not tiresome with fake energy. I'm not familiar with those, but I know kind of what you're talking about there, Sean. I think you just need to be organic and yourself. However, I have not created anything yet. Agree with all of those statements. You know, there's a certain element to which you just have to like knuckle down and just keep doing it. And that's the thing that I remind myself of. It's like there are some videos that I put in a huge amount of effort to, and they do really poorly. And then there are some videos that I put in very little effort and they do really well, because I was talking about the Fuji X-T2, and so like everybody's like piling on to tell me what a buffoon I am for not worshiping and bowing down. And it's like, okay, fine, the Fuji X-T2 is a great camera, but like I'm just talking about how I felt about it for my needs, you know? And it's like I made that one video, probably my second or third highest viewed video on here, talking about like, do I regret buying the X-T2? And I literally put no effort into that video. Like, I went out my front door, sat down on the porch, held the camera, and was like, here's the X-T2 in one hand, here's my, I think it was G7, I shot that on, I was like, blah, 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 here's what I think about the X-T2 for like 30 minutes, and that's been my #1 video. Whereas, like, I'll go out and spend, you know, a weekend shooting something and another 3 days editing it, and then put it out there and get like 150 views. And it's a learning process. I mean, I know that part of it is a lot of times I don't have the time to invest right now into, because like I want to keep up, you know, having 1 or 2 videos publishing every week. I want to keep up with videos for the photo challenge, and I also really want to make sure that I'm getting time with my family and obviously my schoolwork. Like, those have to be first priority. So right now, being able to plan out and do a little bit more methodical videos, and you know, I could experiment with that, right? Like, that's something I haven't tried doing, is just to say, okay, what if I only made 2 videos a month? You know, if I just did 2 videos a month and made them at a higher level of quality, though, if that would be better for the channel, and if I just filled in the gaps with live streams and just like, you know, jumped on here to talk to you guys, maybe that would be just as good. You know, maybe the whole idea about trying to grow the channel by having, you know, 2 videos a week and a live stream, you know, maybe that's sapping some of the quality away from the channel, what I could do with it if I were, you know, if I were maybe putting out fewer videos. And maybe that would be better. I'm not entirely sure. And maybe that's an experiment that I will try doing, you know. Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. It is all too real. That's what I always tell people. And I appreciate that people appreciate that, you know. And JR, thank you for the kind words about my ability to speak to the camera. That's also very kind of you. Like, I appreciate that. King usually says, in a world filled with growing fakeness posing as culture, the genuine people will have a harder time getting the spotlight. Looking at the recommendation section of YouTube fills me with sadness. Queen of St. McKean says, it's really disappointing when you put a lot of work into a video and no one watches it. Yeah, all of those things are true. I think that ultimately, where I have landed on this is that, you know, it's really easy to say that, you know, you should do stuff in such a way that the work is its own reward, where you legitimately don't care if anyone sees it. And not like that you want to hide it from people, but that it's worth it to you to have done that thing, even if nobody else sees it. And it's really easy to talk about that and to be like, yeah, that's why I do this, because you know that video about how you don't care about your YouTube views anymore. Like, maybe that's going to get picked up and you're hopeful that it's going to happen and you're all stoked because, you know, like my quitting professional photography video, I'm just like, I have nothing else to talk about. I think I'm done being a professional photographer. I'm going to go be a nurse. I'm going to make a video about that. Hey guys, I'm done being a professional photographer. And then like that video blows up, which is great. You know, I guess my thing, one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to finish the thought that I just had, but one of the reasons why I mentioned Matt Day earlier and why I love Matt so much is because of the fact that he's able to get traction on videos that are not like, that aren't just like nonsense. You know what I mean? That aren't like these like clickbaity, like, oh my god, you never believe what happened next type of video, like with girl holding her swimsuit, you know, one of those type. He doesn't make those like cheap shot videos. He makes real honest videos that are the type of videos that I want to make, that are a good balance between elegant and but not extravagant, but honest, but not pretentious, educational and informative, but not tutorial. You know, he has a really good way of kind of mixing those things together in a similar way that Simon Cade from DSLR Guide does, like where they do things that are really useful and valuable, but that aren't like based around clickbaity searching stuff, you know? And so anyways, that's kind of where I'm at. That's what I'm aspiring to. That's what I want to do. And it's like the work has to be worth it in and of itself. And it's very, very easy in anything creative to get thrown off and to let our priorities go in the wrong place. JR asked if I'm still doing professional photography. I'm not. You know, if I had the opportunity to, I probably would in the right situation, under the right circumstances. But right now, the way I look at it, the difference between professional and where I am, which is something less than professional, is that I can make work that is worth money. However, getting clients who need the kind of work that I like to do and that I want to do and that I believe that I do well is more work than I want to put in to doing that. And so if I have the opportunity to do professional photography, it will be always, at least the way I see it at this point, as an auxiliary to a stable income that is not freelance based, which is going to be nursing. Right now it's teaching at the college where I'm taking pre-nursing courses. I'm also teaching in the movement science department, which is awesome. I love teaching. Love teaching it. Frankly, if I could teach photography, like I would love to teach photography. Because yeah, it's funny, like even the fellow students in my classes, like every time I have a chance to, I'm like, dude, you guys gotta check this out. Look at this new lens. It's really like 30 years old, but it's awesome, and it's from Russia. And isn't that awesome? You know, and they're just like, you have a camera in your phone. Are you dumb? So, but yeah, but I love teaching, but honestly my goal is to be able to make any income that comes from photography as an auxiliary, as a secondary thing to fill in the gaps. And I think that that could happen someday. And I actually met another fellow on here, Jake, was it Jake? I forget his last name. A fellow who commented on one of my videos, the one actually where I talk about quitting photography and going into nursing. He started off as a nurse and is going into professional photography. And I'm like, dude, you did it the right way, because you started from a stable occupation where you had money and then you built a photography business off of that. Whereas I tried to say, you know, for me it was a do or die for income, like you're saying there, Ryan, is do or die for me right out of the gate, and that sucked the passion out for me, and much harder to, you know, much harder to do. Yeah, Jason, I've definitely thought about teaching a lot, and in the future I may even teach in like somewhere in the medical nursing sphere. And honestly, if I could, I mean, it could. Well, I'll get to that in a second, what I want to do with nursing, my goal in the long run. But yeah, the teaching versus nursing thing, I just know too many teachers that are bartenders, or that are adjunct professors that have $50,000 in graduate school loans that can't get a job because, like, can't get a full-time job. Well, I mean, I can teach photography on this channel if I wanted to, right? Like, I don't need anybody. I would probably do better, have a better audience, and I would have to think about teaching photography, but what I teach at the school is movement science. It's like first aid, CPR, so it's kind of in the same direction of what I'm doing. But yeah, the student loans are just like so high, and then, you know, if you're going to be a college professor, you have to get tenure, which is harder and harder and harder and harder and harder to get because everybody is adjuncts now. So you spend a whole bunch of money getting a degree that you're not really going to get paid back for, unless you happen to be, you know, I mean, you may hit your stride just right, or if you teach, like, you know, high school, if you're a math sciences teacher, you might have better luck there. But if you're in the humanities, which is what I would probably go for, then it's a little bit harder to get, you know, foot in the door. And really what I want to do, it's like I'm 35 and I don't have anything to show for myself as far as a career goes. I mean, obviously not saying that to diminish what I've done with photography and filmmaking and with Living Vertical and that website and the people that amazing people, including y'all that I've come in contact with, but from a financial standpoint, you know, I don't have anything to hang my hat on at all. Quite the opposite. I'm like in the red by a considerable margin. And so what I'm looking for is a good balance between freedom and financial payback and flexibility. All three of those things. And really, nursing, there isn't anything that I can find that has a better opportunity than that. And so nursing has that very straightforward application, which is like you go work in a hospital, you work in the ER, you work in delivery and labor, you work in you know, surgery, you work in pediatrics, etc. And that's something that I probably, once I get certified, I will probably do that for a handful of years. But ultimately, where I would like to be in 10 years is to have some sort of a little bit more of a hybrid arrangement where I'm either doing half photography, filmmaking, and then half nursing, or specifically travel nursing, or I would like to maybe have some sort of a seasonal nursing gig, like maybe working in a school, like as a school nurse, or doing some sort of like expedition nursing, or like Doctors Without Borders, humanitarian type of thing, something that's a little bit more off the beaten path and adventurous. You know, maybe working for Peace Corps, get some of my loans forgiven. I'm not sure if Peace Corps does that or who does it, or like military, work on a base overseas for 3 or 4 years, forgive my student loans. Like, that would be a good deal. And then be able to move forward with my life, you know. But I want to be able to have the freedom to pursue photography, you know, and even start building out the professional side of that. But for right now, I'm just not interested in trying to do that beyond just the Amazon links, Patreon, YouTube ad revenue, which, you know, the Patreon right now is the biggest thing. And again, thank you to you guys here that are on the live stream tonight that are supporting on Patreon. That's greatly appreciated. It's super. And I'm actually, just this weekend, one of the reasons why I am not... King Uzi, that's exactly right. The medical person, like Everest Base Camp, I know they always have like a medical professional or 3 there at the expeditions, and there's lots of different things like that where, you know, I would like to do something, or even like a flight medic, flight nurse. They get paid well, and they have a fairly adventurous job, and you know, the more you specialize within that field, and or doing some sort of nursing, like working with a program to teach basic life-saving skills and basic hospital stuff to people like in other countries, you know, like in developing worlds, in the developing world, I guess you could say, or, you know, I don't know exactly where I'm going to go with it, but I would like to do more interesting things with my nursing. I would like to use that because I have a fairly specialized skill set as somebody who can communicate effectively, make media, save potentially perform life-saving things and do all that stuff on a shoestring, like in high stress and wilderness, high angle in some cases, from a climbing standpoint. Like, it's a fairly diverse skill set, and I would like to do more than just be signing people in to go see the podiatrist or whatever at my local, clinic. Although certainly, not to say that there's not a lot of stuff I could learn there too, because I'm not above that. So I'm excited to see where it's going to go for me personally. But yeah, the hardest thing, male nurse kissogram. Well, I don't know about that. It's an idea. I could look into that. That might be a thing to develop. One of the things I can say is that I think that for me the big factor was recognizing that I still have a choice. Oh, it's a Halloween costume. Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, it's a choice that one has with what they want to do. And I really got to a point where I felt like I didn't have a choice. Like, I felt beleaguered with what I was doing with all the, what would you call it? The photography stuff. It just wasn't working for me. I wasn't really super happy with it. And, the hardest part for me was just pulling the trigger and saying, okay, like, I'm just going to go just burn it down and walk away. And not really burn it down, obviously, because, like, hey, still got cameras and stuff like that. Yeah, King Yuzi, I actually thought you were suggesting that I become some kind of a male stripper in a nurse costume, which, once I get back in the gym a little bit, we'll see about that, maybe. Maybe a YouTube channel about that. Kind of have to see where that goes. But it's never really been my style. I mean, I have a hard time, doing the intro for my photography videos, be like, hey guys, this is the adventure photo show and everything, and remembering what I'm going to say. I don't know if I'm the guy that, I'm going to get a little bit too much in my head. I don't think I would. I'm just not cut out for being a stripper. I don't think I'm the guy for that job. But anyways, yeah, realizing that it was okay to just say, you know what, I've done this one thing for the last 5 years, and I'm going to just go the complete opposite direction. That's all right. That was the hardest thing to get through my head, was, give myself permission to, surrender, I guess you could say. Put up the white flag and just be like, okay, done deal, enough with photography as a profession, time to, go in a different direction and see if that doesn't help, so. Queen of San Joaquin, I don't think she would care at all, honestly. Which, I don't understand, because I don't think, yeah, whatever. Yeah, I don't think she would care. As long as it made decent money. She would probably prefer that I be a stripper if I made decent money, to me spending all the time that I do on YouTube, given what I don't make on here. So, yeah, whatever that means, it is what it is. But anyways, that's one of the reasons why I'm going to be a nurse. Sean Halgren says, I'm also in my 30s, have never had clear direction. I know I need to start making a decision now. Personally, for me, the most important thing is aligning everything with the kingdom of God. Well, and I know that, different people have different religious persuasions. I don't talk about mine a huge amount. I'm also Christian, and that's a big part of my life and my decision-making process. And I think to some extent, the belief that there's a certain period of time that I went through where I felt like anything that I would do, I was free to fail, because if I didn't succeed, that, God would come and help me. And I think there's a certain extent to which I look back and I feel like he definitely has in many ways. And I'm very thankful for that, because I know that the success that I've had is not because I'm better than anyone else. And some people look at these things and they say, oh, you know, it's impossible, it's all it's all random happenstance and chance, and people are welcome to that opinion. I don't you know, deny that that's a valid way to look at things, but for me, I look at it, I believe that there's divine intervention that takes place, and I choose to look at it that way, you know. And if from a philosophical construct, you know, the one of my favorite philosophers was in college, and still is. Well, yeah, and I don't totally disagree with that, King Yuzi. I think that's kind of the point that I came to, is that there's a point to which, you know, God gives us opportunities to do things, and then there's also a point in time where He gives us the ability to see that we have to be responsible and make better decisions and grow up. And I think for me, a lot of that happened with my daughter arriving on the scene. And then, you know, I had my own plan, and I was like, no, I'm going to keep doing what I was doing because that's who I want to be, you know. And I kind of went down that path for a while, and it just didn't, you know, it just, I kept hitting a wall, and I have a pretty hard head. I can hit the wall a lot, you know, but that's part of the deal. You know, you have to work with what you've been given. And oh boy, okay. Well, Queen of San Joaquin, I don't know why you're bursting in flames over there. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit more. King Easy says praying for success won't bring success unless you actually get out there. 100% agreed. There's, you know, I think there's definitely a lot of precedent for the, you know, the idea that prayer is useful insofar as it's not a way for us to try to, it's not a way for us to abdicate responsibility. It should be, you know, it's sort of like the Native American Native American proverb of, you know, like when we're weak we ask for strength, and then Great Spirit or God or whatever they call him, that He sends challenges to make us stronger. And I think that's kind of the way it goes, is that, you know, a lot of people look at, I got you. Okay, well, you know, we can still be friends. We can still talk. We don't have to see everything eye to eye there. But, you know, I think that the idea is that we have a choice about the way that we handle challenges and the way that we handle things that go wrong. And a lot of times people view religion or God as like pie in the sky, where it's like, oh, we can come along and we just get to have everything our way and we get to be right about stuff, or we get to use God as a prop so that we can say, like, here's my political view and God said this, so therefore, you know, my political views are right. You know, there's all these kind of things that happen, and, you know, none of it, you know, it's all foolishness. You know, that's not what it's supposed to be at all. And so I agree. I agree insofar, you know, as what you're saying about that stuff. So yeah, we got, the troll alert finally got in this evening. I feel like I'm falling off my game, you know, as the trolls are taking a little while to get in on the evening's activities. Yeah, so that's interesting. That's my first. That is my first foray into. That's true. Everybody says that the trolls are a sign of success, and I was gonna say, like, that's, you know, I gotcha. Sandwich. I see what you're doing there. Okay, the wordplay. Yeah, it's always fun when I can have little discussions that go beyond the camera stuff and get into socio-political, religious stuff. That's always interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think that one thing I would say, Sean, and well, actually, you're both Sean, at least the only two people that I know on this live stream to be of the Christian faith. What I would say is that, I forget the specific verse that it is, but basically, that God has given us all talents and He's given us gifts, and that it's not it's not a matter, like a lot of people have this idea that the only way to serve God or to be a good Christian is to, be involved strictly as in churches or as a pastor or what have you, or some sort of a missionary. But I think that there's an extent to which everything that we do well, and we do as a representation of the gifts that are, there you go, Romans 12:6 I knew it was somewhere in the New Testament. I thought it was in the Corinthians, but I'm a little rusty on my citations, my biblical citations, but that the idea is that we're all given gifts, and it's our responsibility to find out what those gifts are and to use those as best we can, and that also that a person who does good work is worthy of being paid. And there's a certain level of pragmatism, which is kind of where I was starting to go with all this, is that there is pragmatism. It's a choice to believe, and that it's not a matter of a pie in the sky thing that just happens out of nowhere, but it's we make a choice to believe, we make a choice to not believe. As much as many people may not agree with that, but William James is the father of pragmatism, the philosophical school of thought back in around the turn of the century, and that really always appealed to me, because I feel like there's an extent to which a lot of mainstream religion today is based around the idea that there is that we need to convince other people of things. And I don't really look at it that way, because if you can make an intellectual argument that fits in a human intellectual box for a specific spiritual belief, if you can make that argument and a person buys into that, then ultimately what they're buying into is they're buying into a construction that you have made, which is something that is always inherently going to be less than the divine, which must be greater than us, right? So at the end of the day, there is a reality of any divinity being beyond us, being greater than us, being outside of our capacity to know, think, and even experience. And so belief is not something that is objective, like, oh, here's why you should believe, here's how I can prove that this is the case, here's how I can argue for God's existence. It's saying I choose to believe because, this is a choice that I'm making, because there are facts and then there are interpretation of facts. And the interpretation of facts is where things get very squirrely, is because some people choose to see things as, as meaning one thing, some people choose to see them as other things, and some people want to believe that they have no choice in the matter and it just is what it is. And I am of the persuasion that we always have a choice, and I am always willing to admit, and I don't know how, I haven't compared this view on Christianity with other Christians, because I don't actually go to church as such. I haven't really found a church, because my own views are not necessarily in the, in the mainstream necessarily, but I would say that there is. Oh hell! I forgot where I was going. With that. I saw all the talk with the trolling going on here. Yeah. But anyways, yeah, where I was going with all this is about the choice to believe, and that a lot of people get concerned with the idea that they have to prove something to other people, and I've never been interested in trying to prove anything to anybody else. But also by that same extension, I tend to not go along with, I've always been a little bit less than interested in sort of organizing myself from a community collective standpoint, because of the fact that my view on evangelism as such is much less about, much less from a standpoint of like having to go out there and save souls and like win people over to my way of thinking, but rather my way of thinking is much more that, focusing on the choice that I have to believe and how that has impacted my life and why I make that choice, and also to, I think that's a King Yuzi. I think that's a very fair way to put it. I think that's common decency, right? We should all be able to at least do that. And I don't begrudge other people that don't feel the way that I do or that don't believe it. Oh, that's where I was going. With this pragmatism, okay? So with the belief of pragmatism and, choosing to believe, William James wrote a book called The Will to Believe, where he kind of separated the idea of faith and belief from being like a knee-jerk like experience that's pie in the sky into something that's an intellectual process where you reason from what you know and you insert intellectual variables into the gaps of things that you don't know and use that to build a bridge to say this might not work, but this is the direction that I'm going to go until I feel like it's not working, and I'm going to go in a different direction. And so like the way I look at it is like I could be wrong about like all of this stuff, the idea of belief, we could always be wrong, and that's something that I think that we have to be okay with, because we're always taking that risk, because everything that we do is always going to be flawed. So anyways, enjoy your coffee, Samuel. I actually did not get coffee tonight. I actually haven't eaten my dinner yet. I still have steak that I have to make, but I'm going to do that afterwards. Sean says, I guess what I wanted to say in a nutshell is combining my work with what I believe and what is important to me. Well, I totally get where you're coming from there. But I think there are many ways to, I think there are probably a lot of different ways to do that. I think the key is finding, well, it's a process, man. It's a process. Like, you have to figure out what works and what doesn't work for you. And, there are different things that are going to work for you at different times and seasons, and other things that are not, so you have to kind of roll with that and figure out what's the best fit for you. There was definitely a time for me when photography was good as a standalone means of supporting myself and my family. But there's also, that realization that, hey, when it's not working anymore, then you got to be open to, or at least for me, that was the answer, was being open to doing other things and looking at kind of starting over. And hey, if 10 years from now I'm doing a live stream where I'm talking about how I don't need to be a nurse anymore, that would be great. But, King Yuzi says, I think of it, meaning faith, I'm assuming, as an insurance policy in case there is an afterlife. Well, I think that is one way that you can look at it. I think that, to a certain extent, that's the same way as, like, going to the gym because or not, like, doing certain things, or not smoking or what have you because you want to, avoid a heart. Maybe this isn't a good analogy, but, like, the way I look at it is, I think that's, I hear what you're saying. That's not necessarily where, I guess I would say that, like, I try to look beyond, like, I try to do more than that. Sometimes it's hard to not just be like, yeah, it's just an insurance policy, because I don't think of it as something that impacts me right now. I think of it as something that is like you say, an insurance policy for the afterlife. But then there have also been times in my life where, being perfectly honest, my faith has been something that has made a huge impact in my life in a day-to-day setting, and really gotten me through some really tremendously difficult times. And again, people could make the argument that, oh, it's all imaginary, it's all in your head. Maybe so, but that's not really something that I'm going to argue about. This is just my interpretation of my experience, which experience is always open for interpretation, which is one of the things that makes it, kind of dangerous, right? But in my experience, faith has been something very transformative in my life. Um, you know, it's been very transformative in my life, and so to that extent I've seen it and I've experienced it as something that is more than just kind of that, insurance policy for the afterlife. It can be, anyways. It can be much more than that if you allow it to, and if you're willing to give it that chance. And for me, honestly, the times when that opportunity has presented itself has more often than not been at times when my own efforts were not working out well and did not pay off. And so I, kind of was at the end of my rope. And it's at those moments that you really find out what the fabric of your life is made out of and who you are as a person. You can't really discover those things from a position of comfort or success. At least that's been my experience. It's been when I've been really scraping the barrel, is when I find and I learn things that are, that are of deeper significance, in the big picture for myself, and so that's part of the reason, frankly, why I pursue climbing, is because it's sort of an artificial way to force myself out of the comfort zone, and the payoff is much more, and it's analogous, it's something that is it's a type and a shadow of the same things, that I see in my own faith. It's like when you go out and you push yourself and you're in a situation where you're requiring, where you reach your limit, that's where you begin to see good things happen. But with climbing, it's a little bit more tangible and physical, whereas, spiritually, it's maybe a little bit more quality of life, a little more metaphysical. So that's one of the reasons why climbing has always really appealed to me, aside from just, being outside in nature. And I think this is something that a lot of people can agree on, regardless of religious persuasion, is that there is something very special about being outside. It is something that is very, it is very spiritual. There is something spiritual to that. And I don't worship creation. I'm not an animist as such, and I know that, others may be. But for me, it's a very, for me, like, in a lot of ways, being outside is something that I feel like I have a lot of my most, my deepest connection, I guess you could say, religious experiences, if you will, for me happen a lot of times outside, more so than they do anywhere else, because my mind is in a very different place when I'm outside, and I think that's one of the things that I, would advocate for others, or something that I would say that I found useful. Queen of San Joaquin said, "I disagree with the insurance policy thing because faith is sacred, or at least it should be." Yeah, so that's an interesting way to look at it. I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think that in the ideal that it is, I think that there is also something that is very, there's something that's also pragmatic or practical, about faith that is maybe feels less sacred. But I think there's a certain point to which, and I think that what King Yuzi is saying is maybe articulating something that is more like a struggle with your faith. Like, I think that it's something that you have to hammer it out. It's not something that is, in other words, for me, I like the concept of that will to believe, because the will implies a certain forcefulness, a certain effort that goes into it, like that it's not something that, oh, this is just how I feel, so therefore this is true, but rather it's saying, like, this is a choice. This is something like in any other type of relationship where you have to put that effort in, and you have to hammer it out, and you have to make sacrifices, and you have to fight, and you have to struggle and work and doubt and ask questions and be skeptical and maybe walk away and come back. Like, those are all things that are part of that process of faith for me. And I think it's more than just a religious experience that says, oh, faith is sacred, and like, it is, but like sacred is not just, I think it's more than what we typically see as being procedural, like ceremonial or procedural things is how we usually delineate the sacred, but rather it's something that is much more like roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty and get in there and like work on it. That's something that is, I think, a big part of it too. Yeah, and I think that's I think that's important, to have that sort of skepticism, because I think it's most of the people that I know who are the people that I know who are the most anti-religious, or that are most atheistic, like, there are some people who are like passive atheists who are just like, yeah, I just, I don't really know if there is or not, and I don't really care, and I'm just kind of like whatever. And then there are some people that are like, if you are religious in any way, or specifically if you're a Christian, then I just am going to go to war with you. And there are people just like adamant about it, really, really aggressive. Those types of like aggressive atheists, all of those people that I know, they were all people who had really bad experiences, and they have come from families and experiences where they have been surrounded by people who misrepresented or abuse their position. Not like abuse, like, that they're upset because they were abused, but it's just like they had bad experiences with people, and that is what turned them off to the whole concept of religion, because they can't get past their offense that they experienced with one person or a handful of people or a group of people, and they think that, that they're looking through the wrong end of the telescope. And I'm not saying that this is what you were doing, I'm just saying, just a generalization from what I've observed with other people, is that they get so hung up on a painful experience that happened, that instead of recognizing that flawed people misinterpreted the divine truth that they were entrusted with, they look at it as saying there is no divine truth, it's all just a bunch of people who are trying to take advantage of me, and anybody else who is trying to connect with any kind of divinity is just actually in on their scheme too. Yeah, like PTSD. I think that's exactly what it is in one form or another. And it's interesting because I try to talk to these people, and they're like, oh, well, you're different. Like, I'm not talking about people like you. And I'm like, well, I'm just not trying to shove anything, I'm not trying to shove my beliefs down anybody's throat. I'm just, because I think that before I open my mouth and start trying to give people advice about stuff, I have things in my own life that I need to nail down. And I think there's certainly biblical precedent for that, that way of thinking too, is that, you're better to kind of keep your mouth shut and have people think that you're stupid than, open your mouth and remove all doubt. And so that, the whole splinter and, take the stick out of your own eye before you try to pick the splinter out of your neighbor's eye. Like, you need to really work on your own salvation and your own issues. And I think that that's something where I've never felt like, so I'm always very, not reticent speaking about it, but I'm always like trying to work on my own side of things first before I'm putting other things out there for other people, Yeah, it's very apropos, I think, because more often than not, what people experience of believers sharing the gospel with them in a lot of ways, and in a lot of times, especially nowadays in social media, it's usually some sort of attack. At least that's what it seems like to me. Like, I don't see a lot of people sharing their faith. And I mean, as a Christian, like, I'm not on social media, and I don't like drape myself in the flag, and I don't, I'm not one of those, like, I mean, like, if you look at my beliefs on paper, like, nobody would know what to make of me, because I believe a lot of different things, and I don't fall into any neat group per se. But I think that a lot of times what people really experience of any kind of religious Christian offering to their life is usually some sort of judgment or an attack. It's like, how often is you know, present company excluded, right? Because like Sean Kim, I follow you, and I don't think that's actually I think that's just your handle, but Sean Kim Style on Instagram. You know, I've been following you there for a while, and like you always are posting Bible verses and stuff, and like what I get when I read your postings, I don't get judgment, I don't get pretentiousness, I just see like sincerity and love, you know, and like to me, I'm like, well done, like that's good, that's a good target that a lot of people, but that's very rare. What I mostly see with it is either like Joel Osteen, pie in the sky, like, you know, God is Santa Claus, and so he wants you to have a new Corvette, or God hates you because you didn't vote for my guy. Those are pretty much what I see with the predominance of mainstream Christianity, and I'm just like, like I don't get that. That's not for me. That's not what I believe in. And so, you know, the truth is that the reality of it involves a lot more introspection and judging ourselves and being deliberate about how we present ourselves to others, and you know, looking for opportunities, you know, to talk about what we believe in a way that is constructive and that shows love and that helps other people. Because it's very easy, it's much easier to talk about this stuff in a way that, you know, again, looks through the other end of the telescope and puts me first, and this is why I'm better, and this is why I'm right, and this is why you're dumb and you're wrong, and, you know, oh look, by the way, like, you know, here's a divine perspective that proves that I'm smarter than you are, right? Like that's, it's a lot easier to do that, and so unfortunately that happens, you know. Yeah, that's funny. Can use, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I have a couple of friends that are like that. Well, my sister-in-laws are both like that. And it's funny because, like, one of my sister-in-laws was just like, oh, like, I'm never going to let my kids learn anything about Christianity. They're, like, so intolerant. They're, like, the dumbest people. I hate them. They're so, and, like, she started rattling off all this stuff, and I was like, hey, you do realize that you're referring to, like, my deeply held spiritual beliefs here that I've always been very polite about and not pushed on you and stuff. Oh yeah, well, you know, it's totally different. I'm not blah blah blah. And it's just like, oh man, you know, like a lot of, you can't tell these people anything, you know. Um, let's see. Queen of San Joaquin says, I'm just going to say Christians burn witches at the stake and drown them and torture them. If I was a jerk, I could say, well, all Christians suck, but that's contrary to my faith. Well, that's good. You know, I think you could also make the argument that, you know, if people were burning other people at the stake, are they really, you know, demonstrating the teachings that Christ gave us? You know, so there again, you know, I would have to say that you might not be, you know, I mean, I think it's good that you have a, what's the word I'm looking for? Not judicious, but, you know, that's generous. That's a generous view of the situation, for sure, but I think there's also a certain extent to which a lot of people, you know, like I would look at that and I would say, well, yeah, I don't see in, you know, I don't see the teachings of Jesus saying that we should go around burning witches at the stake, you know, so. But yeah, King Uzi, that's right. You know, people twist them to suit their own needs, and that creates a lot of problems. No question about that. I mean, we can see a whole bunch of that, you know, going on right now. You know, everybody's out to get somebody else, you know. That's cool, Sean. That's cool. Sean says his English professor was an outspoken atheist. And Sean's an outspoken follower of Christ, and so it was very interesting. He had a lot of debates, and yeah, a lot of bad things are done in the name of a lot of different, and you know, there are a lot of bad things that are done in the name of a lot of different things too. You know. Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, Islam has been dragged through, I mean, without wanting to get all conspiratorial here, well, that's not true. I'll take the risk. You know, I think that the majority of the terrorism stuff has been largely embellished and done in such a way to create unnecessary tension and to make people in this country demonize, you know, demonize people from of Middle Eastern extraction or origin, and also, you know, Islam, and create religious tension between religious and social groups here and all over the world. I mean, I can tell you that very ironically, when I was in Oman, you know, I mean, I haven't been all over the Middle East, but Oman is like very, very Muslim country, and I felt safe. I felt comfortable. I didn't feel like anybody was out. I mean, even like from a standpoint of like, I mean, I stuck out. Like, I mean, look at me, you know, like I don't look like I didn't look like I fit in, but I felt like everyone was very tolerant, very nice, and frankly, the Islamic culture is much closer to actual traditional Christian conservative values than what most Christian conservatives in the United States like champion in our pop culture. Popular culture of the West is much further from actual Christianity than like Muslim culture, because Muslim culture is very much family first, very traditional values. You know, I mean, granted, I can't give like a whole dissertation on it because it's not like I know that much about it, but I'm just saying from the time that I spent there, it was a real eye-opener, again, to be able to say, yeah, you know, like, these are people that, you know, I mean, like, it's not my thing, it's not my religion, and so I feel like an outsider on some level, but at the same time, like, I feel like I could move into this neighborhood and feel good about it, and feel safer than I could moving into a lot of, you know, American white neighborhoods where I'm supposed to be like everybody else here, and where everything should be, you know what I mean? And so it has made me question a lot of the narratives that we've been given here, especially in the States, and wonder about how much of the things that have happened in, you know, have been leveraging a vulnerable group of people who are half a world away and couldn't really speak for themselves, and kind of just made their religious group sort of be the front, you know, the kind of the representative for, you know, the bad guys, because we always have to have a bad guy to, you know, justify major shifts in foreign policies and wars and all that stuff. So, and, you know, there you go. I mean, and yet, yeah, lack of information and misinformation is a huge issue, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, I think that, well, so the whole thing is, like, I'm not afraid of amosexuals or Muslims. I mean, like, the thing is, like, people, I think, should have a responsible view of whatever it is that they're saying or doing, and that they should say and do what they're doing in a way that doesn't, amosexual, I'm assuming that means gun nuts, people who are, like, in love with guns. And honestly, like, I think that I'm a big proponent of the Second Amendment. Absolutely a very big proponent of the Second Amendment, but I think that the Second Amendment part of that is an awareness of the responsibility. And I think, Jason, I think this is what you're alluding to on some level, and I think a lot of people have alluded to this, and they get smeared unnecessarily because people misinterpret this, which is the idea that with great freedom comes great responsibility. And there are people who are very much in favor of the idea of the freedom to, you know, own every kind of weapon and have guns, and there are other people, but they aren't interested in the responsibility that comes along with that. They just want, like, freedom, and I'll pass on the responsibility. And for me, personally, I don't own any guns, but which is something that I need to do, but amen. Second Amendment. That's exactly right. And you know, I think that the, you know, gun control is something that's been kind of a hot issue, and you know, I don't get into it on social media because it's a very nuanced issue. And the way that I look at that particularly is like, you know, I have seen people who I think are what Jason is referring to, the ammosexuals, the people who just like, you know, they like antagonizing other people and rubbing their guns and ammo in other people's faces just to be like a jerk and to be, which to me is not mature, responsible behavior. It's like responsible gun ownership is work, it is discipline, and it is, you know, it's something that you take very seriously. And like the first time I shot an AR-15, I said, you know, I always thought that this stuff was much less serious, and like holding a gun, having to learn how to use it, I was just like, man, this is really serious. I'm not ready for this. Like, this is not a level of, it's like when you're going climbing and you're, you know, you're climbing with somebody, you know, when you're going climbing for somebody for the first time, you realize that you're taking your life and their life in your hands. You know, you're hit with the weight of what you're doing, what's going on there. And I think it's the same thing like with guns, is there are a lot of people that like to retweet and forward and post, you know, pro-gun stuff because it scratches their political itch, but they don't really know what it's like to actually have to be responsible with a weapon and train with it and learn how to use it appropriately as a tool and how to safeguard, and etc. And you know, so it's a different thing. And you know, the whole thing that I look at here with kind of what Jason, what you're saying, and here, and King Yuzi and Queen, that you guys are talking about in terms of like the automatic weapons and what have you. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, and so I can't. Yes, it could be changed, although it would take a significant amount of red tape from a procedural standpoint to change the amendment to say something else. However, the one thing that I look at is that, you know, it is the whole point of having an armed populace is to keep it's a check and balance against tyranny in the government, which some may say is something that, you know, that ship has already sailed, we're already over the edge there, right? And I think that to a certain extent that when the Second Amendment was made, the military had the same type of guns that the people had. And so now that the whole point of the Second Amendment has been, you know, disintegrated because of the fact that the police and the military have weapons that are so far beyond what the populace has, so there really isn't a check and balance in there in the first place, and you don't want to necessarily have the populace running around with, you know, AKs, right? It was single shot powder guns, and that, you know, that the whole point of it was that you could have a group of people come together to be very lethal, but it would require significant coordination to muster that kind of force where you could really do damage. There wasn't the technology that enabled one person to have one weapon that would give him a force multiplying advantage over many, many, many people. And so that's a fair point to make. However, I think that, you know, if you look at everything with the escalation of arms is very alarming, because it starts with the police and the militarization of the police, and people who are staunch advocates or proponents of gun control. Like, if somebody were to say, look, we can wave a magic wand and we can unring the bell and there are going to be no more guns, like guns will just like unhappen, I would be okay with that. You know, I wouldn't say, oh no, I need to have guns. I would say, okay. But the problem is that the proponents of gun control are the same people who are very vocal about how the government is very fallible, very mercurial, it can change on a whim, and that it can be easily manipulated. And so you're saying not that you're going to remove guns, but that you're just going to transfer guns from the citizens to the police, the military, and the government. You're not getting rid of guns. You're not doing anything to control guns. You're just shifting the guns from one group of people to another group of people. A group of people who we can all agree, regardless of race, political persuasion, or etc. Like the public is typically the one at the position of disadvantage, and then there is the government or the system, however you want to look at that, which is typically at a position of advantage. And so we're saying we're going to take the one small advantage from the public who's been getting it in the pants for the last however many hundreds of years, and we're going to give that last advantage that we have, we're going to give that to them, and you know, it's not, gun control isn't getting rid of guns. It's not solving the problem of guns. It's just transferring guns to other people who we've already established can't be trusted and shouldn't be trusted. So it's an imperfect scenario that we have to deal with. And, I don't claim to have any knee-jerk answers to it. I think that there is room for a lot of discussion on this. And I think that there should be serious conversations about, like, automatic weapons and, like, how we regulate those. And, like, the people who are not stable, and background checks, and like making sure that there are checks and balances and protocols, Yeah, well, not everybody understands it, and I think that some of it is cultural, and there is truth to the idea that, there's truth to the idea that the NRA does have a big lobby, and what is appropriate in one culture that has a certain mentality or a mindset, it doesn't necessarily work the same way in every other culture. But that's, I haven't been to Stockton personally. I'm not sure if you're asking me that, Queen, or not. So I realize that not everybody, and like personally I'm pro Second Amendment, but I don't have, there are definitely too many lobbyists, no kidding. I mean, not just in the gun issue, but also like in pharma and like everywhere, literally everywhere that lobbyists can fit, there are too many of them. And that is one thing that complicates the issue, because I think that ultimately if we could have a fair and balanced, reasonable discussion about all of these issues, whether it's like politics, economics, etc., that there would be a much greater opportunity to solve problems instead of just kicking the can down the road if we didn't have lobbyists in the way messing everything up. And I think that the idea that, and where I stand on it personally on the whole thing with gun ownership, is that I think that it's a very unique perspective to say that people have the right to defend themselves and to protect themselves with, lethal means. I think that is, that puts a burden of responsibility on people. But I think that, again, when you have more responsibility, you have more freedom. And there's an extent to which there are freedoms that we enjoy in the United States that people in other countries absolutely do not enjoy. That's part of the deal. And that doesn't necessarily make one experience better than the other. I mean, there are times when I've spent in Europe and the Middle East where even with fewer freedoms, I feel like I enjoy my quality of life there. It's not to say that, if you don't live in a free society with guns and like maximum individual freedom, that you're getting hosed or that's bad, but I think that there are also there are pros and cons, and that's why there's big well, the UK system is good on guns only for hunting with detailed checks and police who deal with terror situations. Well, that may be. I'm not 100% sure that. Let me put it this way: when I lived in Utah, even in the city there, I left my door unlocked. Never had any problem. Everybody was packing heat, and everybody got along very well. Everybody was very polite. Everybody, good fences make good neighbors, and I don't know. I don't necessarily have the answer to it, but I can say that I wouldn't trade living in Utah for living in anywhere else in the country, for that matter. Specifically, if you look at areas like Chicago, where there's gun control, and even many of the big cities in the Northeast, where gun control is a very, it's a very big thing, and the regulations are much tighter, you know, there's much higher crime rates because the people who get the guns who are actually going to do harm with the guns, those are people who don't care about what the laws are, and they're going to get a gun anyways, and they're going to do what they're going to do. And so the people at a disadvantage are the people who follow the laws. And those are the people who most of the time are like, I don't really, what do I'm not a conflict-oriented guy. Like, why do I want a gun? You know, it's like, I think that I should be able to have a gun, but like, you know, I'm not that kind of guy. I'm the kind of person who's going to follow the rules and not get a gun. But the person who you don't want to have with a gun, they're not going to give a rat's ass about the law, and they're going to go get a gun themselves. So personally, you know, I respect other countries' positions and folks from other countries on that, and it may be different. You know, I would love to live in, you know, a country where maybe the culture was a little bit different, or where things were different, or what have you. You know, I'm not married. I don't sleep with a Glock under my pillow. I don't own a gun myself personally at this point. But I can tell you, when my daughter gets a little bit older, I am going to start training with firearms, and I'm going to make absolutely sure that my daughter knows how to use a gun and knows how to defend herself. And I want her always to understand the responsibility and the choices that she is making, and also to understand that she has the right and the power to not be put in a position of disadvantage by another person, without at least having all necessary available means at her disposal to protect herself. And I would want that for everybody, or at least for everybody who wants it. And some people, you know, for myself, I don't you know, I can talk my way out of stuff, you know. Amen, you're right. I will have a shotgun. I actually do have like some shotguns, but those aren't technically, they're not mine. They're like my dad's, and I'm going to be getting those from him at some point. But like, I've just never been, like, recreationally, I don't enjoy guns. I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, I can't wait to go out and shoot a gun. Like, recreationally, I like fishing. I like climbing. I like hiking. I like, you know, cameras. Like, that's what I like. I like to shoot cameras, not guns, you know. Well, on average, we have around 10 to 30 gun deaths a year, I think. Okay. Well, that's, I mean, that's pretty respectable. That's pretty respectable. I mean, again, I don't know all of the, you know, I don't know the population size that you're sampling, and I also don't know about the other means of, you know, harming people, whether it's self-harm or, you know, homicide, suicide, whatever that goes into it. Because a lot of times the statistics that are presented about gun deaths, they also include suicides and other things, and accidental deaths. They don't only include homicides, but they're put out there in such a way as to sound like, you know, as to be very... you know, they're put out there. You can tell a lie with facts that are true, but you can, you know, you can make it sound one way. So I'm not saying that that's what you're doing. I'm just saying that it is a very complex issue. And again, I would be very open to hearing and having discussions about this stuff with people who are experts about this, but who are experts on both sides of the issue. And that's really the problem, is that too much of this conversation is by people who don't necessarily possess the expertise, or they possess the expertise, but they also possess one bias, and then you hear a very kind of slanted approach. And I think there's a lot of room for discussion about this, but I think that it should be done in a way that's fair and balanced, because when you start disarming the populace, things get really sticky. And when you look at any major, like, social collapse, that's one of the things that has historically preceded those things. If you look at, like, the, you know, various communist scenarios, and also even in Germany in the 1930s, that, like, there was no way to do what these nefarious despots wanted to do if you had an armed populace, because then a few disagreeable people could actually present a lot of trouble, and, you know, they don't want to have that. And so if nothing else, other than a check and balance, even if it's a psychological veiled threat of knowing that, yeah, like, people are armed, we can defend ourselves, like, I think that's an important thing. That's a valid, valuable thing. We don't live in a perfect world where everything is warm and fuzzy and everybody just gets along. We live in a society that not that much has fundamentally changed in the process of, and, you know, without opening the religious can of worms on the whole evolution thing, where, you know, survival of the fittest, that's a big part of how we all understand our arrival at this point here socially, if not our origin. For those of us who are maybe of different religious backgrounds, like, if nothing else, where we are at this point certainly has a significant bearing, the survival of the fittest. And so why would anyone want to give up their ability to be more fit if they have the opportunity to retain that right as something that they can responsibly possess without harming other people? And until the case is made that responsible law-abiding gun owners are the ones causing all this problem, and that it's not homicidal maniacs and people who are filled with an intent to break the law in the first place, until, you know, that's really what the discussion hinges on, and I have yet to see that point be thoroughly made. And an interesting point here, Samuel said, the problem with this conversation is that the protection of gun owners and gun rights are not even fair or across all people. Minority groups are punished for having firearms. So I'm not a minority, I can't speak to that specifically, and I'm also not a cop, but half the guns that are in proximity to myself, I don't own them, but they were given or loaned to me by somebody who is a minority, and I know people who are gun owners who are minorities, and I think that there are certain instances in which people who are minorities do get an unfair disadvantage there, and I think that that is a problem. You know, I think that because rather than discouraging gun ownership by minorities, I think we should absolutely be encouraging responsible gun ownership by minorities. I think the problem is that, to a certain extent, when you have people who are by choice or by default getting swept up in the culture in gangster culture, which is what, like it or not, a lot of people you know, that's a lot of what has happened. Those people suffer the consequences of the way that they are perceived, and I don't think that that's right. I don't think that's good. And instead of saying that we should be getting rid of guns, I think we should find a way to broaden that discussion to say, how can we bring more people into, like, how can we make more people better stakeholders in the, you know, in the right to defend ourselves and our property. And I mean, that's a complex question and a complex situation. I don't think that makes this this conversation any less valid. I mean, when I was out west, when I was at Standing Rock, I can tell you that most of the Native American folks that I was in contact with, they were exercising their Second Amendment rights, and I did not feel like there was any. I felt perfectly safe, and I didn't feel like there was any issues there. And not to say that there are not, I'm not saying that your point is wrong, that there are people who are unfairly targeted as a result. I think that's a problem. And I mean, ultimately, to me, I think there's a lot of systemic stuff that goes on to keep groups at bay. In other words, there are minority groups that would agree with, in other words, I think that there are people who are on both sides of, like, different races and different ethnicities that actually, if they weren't kept separate, they would actually realize that they agree on a whole bunch of stuff. And instead of it being like, oh, there are white gun owners over here and minority gun owners over there, it's just like, oh, we're all gun owners, we're all on the same team. And if you look at it from a slightly more conspiracy theory friendly bent, you can see the disadvantage to having groups of people who are armed and who consider each other allies despite their differences, and it would be much more in the service of controlling a greater populace to have those groups separated from each other and at odds with each other. And I think that's a lot of what is going on. And unfortunately, I don't know of or see a systemic way to fix that other than for individuals to be better individuals and to connect and reach out to other people and to choose to go beyond that and choose to build bridges and to connect with people that are different from them, because that's the only way that you realize that after all we're not necessarily so different. You know, it's like we have a perception of how we're supposed to behave towards other people based on various demographic characteristics. And the reality is that everybody is like, it's like a game of telephone, and it keeps everybody separate. It keeps everybody from being able to do anything constructive together, and it's unfortunate. And I think more and more people are becoming aware of this, and more people are waking up to it. More and more people are reaching out and connecting and saying, hey guys, look, like pull back the curtain, see how we're all being manipulated and controlled. You know, Kit, yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that one. I mean, look, there are, yeah, strict gun control and socialism are not necessarily. I mean, it's again, it's a choice, but that's not the way that I would want to live. And I think it's good that we have. That we have options in different countries and different ways that people can, you know, in other words, there are some people that fit better into that way of living. And granted, America isn't that far from going down that path of socialism, but I think that there is, I think there is some value in preserving the freedom of the individual and the responsibility of the individual over more of a state-centric view of how everything should be done. And I think that part of it has to do with the size, because there are things that work in a fairly small country, in other words, like that can be done on a state level. Like there are some states that are much more socialist in the way that they run their governments than other states. But I think if you try to run the entirety of the country, then that, you know, that's a different story. Well, Sean Halgren, that's a great point, and I think that's totally valid. And I can honestly say, like, I have never been an ethnic minority in the areas where I have lived. I'm certainly a political and social minority in the area that I live currently, but you know, that's slightly different. On a smaller scale, you know, my majority of the people that I interact with, my family is Dominican, so I'm like the only white person there, and on a smaller scale, I can empathize. I mean, granted, I know it's not the same thing, but I'm just saying that, like, you know, it's a different experience, and I think that being open to hear the experiences of other people and being sensitive to that stuff, I think that is important. I don't disagree with that. But I think that my larger point from having married into a minority family who is very liberal and not Christian, I can tell you that the majority of the differences that we fight about as a society are things that are manufactured to keep us apart. And that as somebody who is part of the ethnic majority, nothing would please me more than to see, like, reaching out and, like, incorporation and collectivizing, not like political collectivizing, but basically removing that whole the stereotyping and all that negative stuff that keeps our you know, gun owning or people who are minorities who want to be involved in that, you know, too. Samuel, you can tell my sugar is going a little bit low, can't you? Yes, I'm going to eat in a little bit, Samuel, I promise. But this is so interesting. So yeah, like totally get what you're saying. I don't disagree, but I think that that disparity between minority and majority, I think that that is an artificial thing that has been, those flames have been fanned. That's a construct that has been inflamed by the powers that be as a control mechanism, because you can control people if they're separated from each other, you know. And when you actually get out there and you rub elbows with these other people, you find out that, like, oh, after all, like, yeah, we're not really that different. Like, we have a lot more in common than otherwise. King Yuzi says you can have all the guns in the world, but if a corrupt cop tries to kill you and you kill him next, what would happen next? SWAT team turn. Yeah. So, like, again, it's not like my belief in the Second Amendment, or my appreciation, I should say, and it's not that I believe in the Second Amendment. Like, if the Second Amendment goes away, well, whatever. You know, not something that I think should happen, but I think the value of the Second Amendment is that we have the greatest available means to defend ourselves. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be effective. It doesn't mean that it's always going to work. It means that there is an opportunity, that you have the opportunity to do everything in your power to help yourself and to exercise your own ability to defend yourself. And that's the thing that I think is important. It's not to say that every outcome is always going to be good if a cop comes after you, but I think the more likely scenario for more people per capita, just based on the amount of cops versus non-cops and the amount of percentage of cops that are bad and want to just like murder people versus the amount of just normal citizens who would want to murder somebody else. There are plenty of situations that don't unfortunately get the press time where people just, it was just the other day, was somewhere down south, some 60-year-old lady got abducted in a mall. I think it was down in was it Texas or Missouri? It was somewhere in the Midwest. Hey AJ Online, good to see you here. Good to see you too, Matt. She was abducted at knife point, and you know, she was able to free herself from an attacker who probably would have done pretty awful things to her with a knife, because of the fact that she had concealed carry and was able to, you know, get to her gun and defend herself, and she didn't have to shoot anybody or whatever, thankfully. But there was an opportunity that she had to defend herself, and it's like, would I, you know, it's a cost-benefit analysis for me. If I'm going to put myself in a situation, like, as much as I've traveled in the States and as much as I've spent time alone, and I think about it also much more so even for my daughter, because it is a different scenario for her as a girl than it is for me as a relatively large man. I would want people to have the opportunity, and it's a cost that's worth the benefit of being able to defend yourself fully, I think. And I think that, I mean, granted, it's a complex issue. We're not going to solve it all here, but and for those of you who just joined, photography kind of turned into photography turned into a debate on religion, politics, and gun control, which is interesting. So Kit said, if people don't have to turn to crime to feed their families, you can have much less crime. Agreed 100%. Good education and social support helps with crime a lot. Agreed as well. So you don't think that education should be based on merit rather than income? Yes and no. I think that the whole concept of education, and I understand where you're going, like, I don't disagree with the things that social support. So I guess what I would say is, yeah, right, this is good. Well, this could lead to good photojournalism if I get out of the room and actually went somewhere and cover this stuff, right? But like, I see where you're going with that, Kit, and I don't disagree. My whole thing is that I think there's a difference between having socialist, like, socialism works better in a smaller construct, and I think the evidence that we've seen of it working most effectively is in smaller countries, in smaller areas. Now, the idea of having a federal government that is a large, overarching power structure that is socialist, I think leaves itself open to vast abuse, and it's not something that I would want to accept or be involved in. I think that something that on a more state level that pursues these values that you're putting out there about having more social support, having lower crime, better opportunity, and all of these things, I totally agree with that. It's just that it has to be done, and ultimately it boils down to the integrity of the people who are running the operation. You know, so. Yeah, this is interesting stuff. Yeah, in terms of the media and the social engineering, I think that there is a certain extent to which, um, yeah, it's something I honestly wonder about a lot is like, is it possible for us to actually change this, or have we already kind of gone over the falls? Like, have we reached a point where we could actually make changes, or is everything pretty much all sewn up? So, I don't really know. I don't have an answer to that question. Well, I think, yeah, I think, Jason, I think we are the next Rome, by far. I mean, if you look at any, and I think as a society as a whole, like when anybody has as much free time as we have, as much prosperity, and as much, you know, entertainment, the path, it always leads to a very steep decline at some point when somebody else who's hungrier comes and takes over, or some sort of major implosion collapses. And frankly, it would not surprise. I mean, if you think about how much of our, like, the higher and higher we go, the less and less support we have. Right? Like, it's almost like we're on top of this pinnacle, that is just so unstable that if we fall, we're going to fall further and further and further and further and further, because of the fact, it's like everything with the technology and the internet. It's like, think about how reliant we are on all of this stuff. The internet, technology, whatever reason, information is pretty much controlled by 4 companies: Facebook, Google, Apple. Who's the other one? Facebook, Google, Apple. Is it Amazon? Is Amazon the other one? Like, they pretty much, yeah, they pretty much control everything. And everybody was all Microsoft, Amazon. Everybody was all excited because the internet was the Wild West and all this freedom, and then it's just like, really everybody's just getting shooed into a corral, and they slam the gate, and now all the other little companies have been dusted off, and now it's just this big monolith that is, that's left here in place, and this is what we're stuck with. And what is the alternative? And this is the thing that I think about, because I believe that we do have a choice. We always have a choice about how we want to live. And like, I don't know how far out we can reach our choices. We can't stop the media, but at the same time, it's like the media has power because we give the media power. Tension that is created, it has power because we allow it to make us tense on some level. I think there's an extent to which the hardest thing to do is to unplug and just walk away and say, nope, not going to play. Because that's the hardest thing for people to do when so much of their comfort is tied to being plugged in, that they're willing to like get this, be zapped with all this voltage of unpleasantness and distasteful, tension, in order to get their fix of the fun stuff and the cat videos and like, porn, and argue with like, people that they don't like, and whatever it is that we're all doing on the internet at various points in times. Like there's, it's a hard one. It's a hard one to get around, but ultimately, nobody can drive you crazy if you don't give them the keys. So I think there's something to be said for that. Current system of capitalism has been proven to be a farce that serves the richest. Change is inevitable, and you won't know socialist ideas work unless you try it. Yeah, but then at the same time, you know, you look at socialism. Look at Venezuela right now. You know, Venezuela, again, that's what happens when you try socialism. Again, any power structure, why would any other power structure be any different? You know, it's like the power, there's always going to be a power structure in whatever you do, and changing from one to another is not, it's like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. I mean, again, that's the not necessarily the most positive view of humanity, but I think it's fairly accurate. We've seen a lot of societies that have gone towards the path of communism, socialism, and the net result is not typically a good one. And so you can, exactly, the Nazis were socialists, and so were a lot of, I mean, there have been a lot of, and the problem with socialism is that it plays on the naivete and the frustration of decent, normal people to kind of lay down and give up their rights and allow others to come in and, you know, hopefully, you know, give them some sort of relief from the tension that they're feeling, which they may get that relief on a short period or on a short scale, but then everybody has to fall in line and in lockstep and march to the beat of the drummer. And the problem is then if you don't like who the drummer is, well, it's too late. You already cashed the check, so you got to do the deal. You got to take the ride now. And I don't know. I mean, it's a well, fascist, socialists, like fascism is an application, like fascism and socialists are not mutually exclusive, right? Like fascism is effectively saying that, you know, everybody has to be the same on the surface, or that basically everybody has to do the same thing and conform to these same ideals, and if you march out of step, that you're wrong. You can apply that, you can be fascistic about just about anything. But the Nazis were absolutely in favor of a larger government, very, you know, big government, and frankly there were, you know, it was between the Nazis and the communists, and they were both, ultimately they were not that different, which is the same thing that we see here within the left and the right and the parties that we have here politically, is that there's not a huge amount of difference between the right and the left. The majority of it is imagined, if anything. Yeah, well, I mean, all this stuff can get really formidable from a philosophical sense. You know, in other words, the same, yeah, it's like the same people who, the same people who claim to be conservative in, you know, in the government, and claim to be very pro-life and pro-family, those are also the same people that don't want to put in, you know, safeguards so that we can have better maternity care and like have better support for people who want to spend time with their kids, you know, but they're like, oh, we're all pro-life, but we're not going to do anything to help people who want to like have families and need support to spend time with our families. But, you know, so it's like, yeah, people pin names on a lot of different things, and I don't know. Anyways, yeah, we probably have been on this bent for a while, and my point was, I personally, I just want to say, you know, I know that I've agreed, partially back and forth with a handful of y'all on here. We may have very different views. I don't typically talk about political stuff, even though I do feel very strongly about it, and I think that conversations can be very useful and informative. You know, these conversations give me things to think about. Comments that I've gotten here tonight have given me things to think about. So I don't resent or have any I don't think, I don't know, it's like weird. Like, you know, it's kind of a personal thing to have this kind of a conversation with people, because you don't know how many people, like, I don't know how many people were on this stream earlier and then like bailed when I said I'm a Christian, or bailed when I said I believe in the Second Amendment, you know, like, I don't hold anything against people for being atheists or Wiccans or Muslim or you know, anything in between. I don't have anything against people who don't believe in the Second Amendment or what have you, or have different views on politics and all this other stuff. I think it's useful. I think we can respect each other and have good conversations, and I think that's important. But anyways, yeah, I think it's also important to know when to, you know, when to kind of back off it a little bit, because it gets a little bit a little bit much. But yeah, some people dislike it, and that's fine. This is the internet. They're welcome to dislike it. I would probably dislike, and that's therein lies the fundamental problem, is like people would rather just like, it's like this whole like meme conversation type thing where people would rather just post a smug meme about somebody else, something snarky, and then just like walk away, rather than say, hey, look, you know what? You're an okay guy. Like, let's have a conversation about this. We might not agree, but that's okay. And that doesn't mean that I'm better than you or that you're an idiot. Like, you know, it's just much easier to just snipe at people from a distance and then just like run away. And it's unfortunate, because I think that prevents people from actually, it's intellectual dishonesty. It's intellectual dishonesty is what that is. You know, if like people are intellectually honest, they're okay with having, you know, their views challenged, are okay with different things, and you know what, like, hey, I'm okay with having my views challenged, and you know, my blood sugar is probably like 36 right now by the way it feels, so I would guess that might take me off my edge a little bit, but I'm gonna eat once I'm done with this in a few minutes. Yeah, Matt, in terms of the photo, or yeah, in terms of social media vacations, I would highly, highly recommend and advocate for, I would highly recommend doing a little social media detox, probably sometime middle of December. I'm going to take a few months. What I did in the spring, I think it was sometime around, I think it was Christmas or New Year's. I took like 3 months and I didn't start posting again until like March, April. And honestly, like, it was very, 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 very good for me. Very good. Yeah. Yeah, the less you can do and the more disciplined you can be about the time on the phone, that's super helpful. Because I just, like you said, Matt, I feel like well, thank you. I'm glad I'm still in the, I'm still on your list of things to do here, King Yuzi. That's awesome. Samuel, have a good night yourself. Thank you I appreciate your concern for my eating, and I think it's kind of funny that you could tell that I'm low, which I am a bit low, and I am going to eat. But yeah, definitely take a break. I did 3 months is what I did. No, I won't go into a coma on you guys. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't force my diabetic views on you like that. No, but even if you can just take like a couple of months and try it out, you know, that's what I did. I made kind of a big thing about it because I thought I was going to quit permanently, and then I realized, you know, social media does, you know, it does have its value, and it's nice being able to communicate with people. I like being able to share my work, but I want to be more precise and like, okay, I'm going on social media to accomplish this task. I'm going to do this thing, and then it's done, and then I'm going to go do another thing. I'm going to accomplish a task. And it goes quickly from being task-oriented to just being like, oh, I'm going to accomplish this task, and then let me see. And then you just kind of lose consciousness of what you're doing. So you need to give yourself, and you know, it might even be possible to do that. I kind of do that over the weekends a little bit. Good night, Sean. See you around. God bless. I think it's definitely possible to do like shorter term scrubs like that, just to kind of get away from it. You know, you can turn your phone off for a weekend, or you know, I tend to not post on Instagram or like go on social media nearly as much on a weekend. I'll do a little bit here and there, but I'm much more laid back about it. Anyways, guys, it has been interesting evening here, talking about all the least polite things that we probably shouldn't, you know. But yeah, I'm gonna hit the bricks here tonight, guys. It's been a fun live stream. I appreciate you guys tuning in and being engaged, tolerant, patient, and yeah, for being here, part of the community with what we're doing. Let's get out there, make some self-portraits. I think that would be really cool. I'd be looking forward to seeing you guys' work. I still have my own stuff that I'm going to go and edit here a little bit later. If you guys have any questions, think of any comments, etc., drop them on the video. It'd be nice to chat with you guys. And yeah, let's get after it, all right? All right, good night, good day. Thank you all. Drop any comments if you have them. I'm going to go eat. I'll tweet later to make sure so everybody knows I got to the kitchen safely. All right. Take care, guys. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your time.